When did people start smoking weed and more boring history for sleep? Hey guys, tonight we slip backward. Way backward. To a time before anyone even had a word for weed. You picture yourself crouched near a flickering campfire, the air smelling of singed fur and damp earth. Sparks drift upward like tiny, eager souls, and for a second you realize you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in this timeline without shoes, bug spray, or Wi-Fi. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time down below. It's always fun to see where in the world this sleepy little tribe is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into next journey together. You're surrounded by darkness broken only by ember glow. The people here, your distant ancestors, don't yet farm, right, or wonder what's trending. They live breath by breath, meal by meal. Fire is their miracle, their television, their whole nightlife. And sometimes, while tending that glowing cradle, someone tosses a handful of dry weeds into the flames. A puff of odd-smelling smoke rises. The group coughs, laughs, maybe feels a flutter of warmth beyond mere heat. The first high, perhaps, though historians still argue whether it was intentional or just an accident of wind and curiosity. Imagine the rhythm of that moment: crackle, exhale, grunt, giggle. No language for stoned. No songs about it, just a small discovery tucked into evening smoke. Archaeologists have found evidence of burned cannabis seeds in ancient braziers, dating back over 2,000 years. But earlier fire pits could have held all sorts of flora. Whether those early humans noticed a shift in perception or just a sheer lungs, we'll never really know. But the possibility feels real enough to lean into. You shuffle through inns like flipping through dusty pages at double speed. Millennia pass. The Ice Age melts. People settle, plant, and start naming things, including the wiry green stalk that grows tall with sturdy fiber and hint of scent when dried. Hemp winds up serving the first rope's cloth, and maybe the earliest bowstrings. That's the mainstream historical fact. Hemp wasn't about getting high. It was humanity's go-to-multitool. Nothing spiritual, nothing rebellious. Just practical, like a prehistoric roll of duct tape. But every tool invites curiosity. You can almost see a Neolithic farmer pausing mid-harvest, wondering if the plant has more secrets than fiber strength. Maybe the same way you once wondered if your shampoo could double as body wash. Somewhere between necessity and mischief, someone decides to burn it again. Not in the field this time, but quietly, perhaps with purpose. A quirky detail hides in Siberia. Ancient wooden burial mounds known as kurgans sometimes reveal bowls filled with charred hemp seeds. The Scythians, steppe riders with flashy hair and dramatic tattoos, would show up later in the story, and they definitely knew how to hotbox a tent. But traces like these hint that experimentation started long before history wrote things down. Picture an evening under aurora skies, a patched for tribe gathered in a yurt-like hut, smoke curling through a small roof hole. Maybe they claim it keeps spirits away or mosquitoes at bay. Either way, nobody's inventing rolling papers yet, so whatever pleasure they get has to sneak through primitive pipes or just smoldering heaps. You lean closer, smell the earthy sweetness, that faint vegetal sharpness that somehow travels through centuries. It's comforting and alien all at once. The fire hisses as resin pops, the world's first popcorn, and your eyelids droop, half from smoke, half from timeless fatigue. Through that haze, you start to feel the first connection between humans and this plant: curiosity, ritual, and the instinct to explore consciousness. Even if the word consciousness won't arrive for thousands of years, now the camera of your imagination pans across continents. In one place, seeds drop into clay jars for storage. In another, fibers twist into fishing nets gleaming with dew. Somewhere, a child watches subtle flames and swears the patterns in the smoke look like animals dancing. Perhaps this is where mythology begins, when the mind sees worlds inside the drifting haze. Historians still argue whether early cannabis use had psychoactive intent, or if high THC strains hadn't yet spread from their Central Asian homelands. The debate swirls like smoke itself, impossible to grasp. But what matters is that humans and cannabis share roots older than civilization. It was there before money, before flags, before bedtime stories. You imagine nights merging with mornings as tribes migrate. Someone saves seeds, stuffing them beside grains and beads. The generation after generation, the plant travels quietly in human pockets, across frozen rivers and mountain passes. Hemp becomes clothing, food, rope, rituals, occasionally, just maybe, recreation. And each culture that touches it adds another layer of meaning, sometimes sacred, sometimes scandalous. You stretch in your bed as if shaking dust from those ancient caves. The world feels simpler in your mind's eye. No laws, no marketing campaigns, no warnings, only the primal act of breathing in a mystery and seeing what happens next. Maybe that's why this story always circles back to beginnings. The smoke, soft as cloud breath, connects ancient fires to our late-night candlelight screens, linking curiosity across thousands of lifetimes. As the flames fade in your imagination, you hear faint laughter from far away, echoes of people finding calm in the chaos, warmth in the cold, maybe mild dizziness in the dark. You're left with a single imaging two embers, glowing side by side, like a world and its plant companion learning to coexist. Tomorrow, or rather the next stretch of this journey, you'll drift toward those Scythian plains where smoke becomes ceremony and hemp earns its first reputation as something almost divine. But for now, you just breathe out slowly, letting ancient air clear from your lungs, amused by how the world's favorite outlawed leaf began as an ordinary weed that caught fire at exactly the right time. You awaken in the tall, wind-swept steppe, flat horizons melting into the sky, horses grazing like moving shadows. The air here smells of dry grass and smoke, but not campfire smoke. It's something sweeter, heavier, a scent that clings. You walk toward a ring of tents stitched with hide. Inside, voices hum low, rhythmic, and urgent. This is Scythian territory, a few thousand years before Cleopatra's eyeliner or Caesar's salads, and though you've arrived uninvited, no one seems to mind. You duck under the flap, and heat hits your face like an old friend. Stones glow in the center pit while someone pours hemp seeds and buds onto them. A sudden hiss fills the tent, steam, fragrance, chaos, and everyone starts whooping like they've scored a goal only ancient herders could understand. You're coughing before you even realize it, eyes watering, lungs tickled. When the laughter comes, it feels untamable, contagious. Herodotus, the chatty travel blogger of classical antiquity, wrote about this very thing around 4040 BCE. He described Scythians celebrating funerals by crawling into little tents, throwing hemp on hot stones, and howling in their joy. Mainstream historians take that as one of the first recorded accounts of cannabis being used for its high rather than its fiber. A footnote of humanity, yes, but also a revelation the smoke had purpose, ceremony, and maybe comfort for grief. You recline on a rug, letting the waves of sound blur together. It's trance-like, the percussion of drums, the bleating of reed pipes, the rhythmic clink of jewelry as riders sway beside the flames. In this culture, to commune with smoke is not taboo, it's sacred. Spirits of ancestors drift among the haze, the border between the living and the dead gets as foggy as the air itself. Outside, horses shift impatiently, their tack made from hemp rope that glints silver under moonlight. This plant truly rules the camp. From reins to smoke to thread in fur coats. It's a one-stop shop for nomadic survival and apparently afterlife communications. You catch yourself smiling because the modern world thinks it invented multi-purpose living. These riders already had the eco-friendly lifestyle down centuries ago. A fringe tidbit: some archaeologists found small gold vessels and burial mounds containing residue matching cannabis and opium. Whether the Scythians were mixing their menu, weed cocktails of the early Iron Age, or storing sacred herbs separately, historians still argue whether these chemical traces prove complex drug rituals or just funerary imports gone dusty. But you can almost picture them tinkering with proportions like prehistoric bartenders. You lie back, imagination fading into smoke patterns. The air inside the tent glimmers like heat mirage, bending shapes into swirls that almost dance. Someone plays a simple rhythm on a hollow drum. Thump, thump, pause. The sound crawls into your pulse and synchronizes, lulling you. These people understood altered states not as rebellion, but as conversation with unseen things. Their logic: if the sky changes when we burn this plant, maybe our souls can follow. Outside, dawn stretches her pale fingers across the grasslands. Smoke leaks from the tent tops and dissolves into sunrise, like dreams escaping. The Scythians will pack up soon, horses restless, carts groaning, trails vanishing beneath them. But the story they start, one of ritual smoke and borrowed peace. travels further than their arrows. It transplants itself into the myth, making soil of every civilization they meet. As you step out into the chill air, everything feels sharper. The wind bites through layers, reminding you that enlightenment comes with goosebumps. The earth beneath your feet hums in its quiet prehistoric way, unscrolling history at its own pace. You realize that the Scythians, for all their tattooed bravado and warrior fame, might have been the planet's first informal philosophers of the inhaling, exploring existence, not through scrolls, but through sensations. Some stories claim their women fought alongside men, archers with equal skill. You watch one now, she's painting a stylized deer on her bow. Smoke trails across her path, she hums something between a song and a spell. The scent hangs like a cloud of memory. Centuries later, cultures from the Mediterranean to Mongolia will borrow fragments of Scythian customs, but none will bottle this precise mixture of grit and grace. You sit quietly, imagining what the inside of that gold vessel looked like when first sealed, seeds and buds pressed like tiny fossils of joy. When archaeologists opened it thousands of years later, their tools brushed aside dust, revealing something profoundly human residue of escape. Because no matter the century, people seek ways to soften the edges of reality, and the steppe is nothing but edges. Cold wind, endless movement. Maybe this smoke served as pause, a momentary home. A passing rider grins at you, his hair in braids, face streaked with soot. He gestures toward his bag, pulls out a bundle of hemp rope, and with an exaggerated wink, bunches his hands together as if weaving life itself. You think of all the modern ways we spin the same fibers. Shirts, lotions, activism hashtags. But here it's just daily rhythms. The difference between survival and luxury lies in Thailand vibe and then necessity, now nostalgia. The heat in the tent fades, breath clouds in the cool dawn. The tribe mounts their horses, silhouettes cutting against the glowing eastern sky. Behind them, the smoke from spent fires thins and twists, reluctant to leave, like memory itself. As the last hoofbeats echo away, you stand at the edge of their territory, watching wind erase tracks faster than history can write them. What they leave behind isn't architecture or scripture, it's scent. Faint, sweet, impossible to bottle. The smell of the world discovering that plants could whisper to the mind. You breathe it in one last time. The air tastes ancient, a little wild, slightly forbidden. You exhale slowly, and the landscape around you dissolves into gold light, carrying you onward toward the next stop. Austere temples, singing reeds, and priests who will claim that even gods love a good puff of incense now and then. The air hums with bees and heat as you stroll into the Nile Valley. The sunlight here doesn't shine, it burns, painting every surface gold. Papyrus rustles like whispering scrolls, crocodiles laze in the water, and priests glide past you wearing linen so fine it seems stolen from moonlight. Egypt greets you with ritual, dust, and perfume thick enough to taste. And somewhere beneath all that divine fragrance, another plant quietly smolders. Hemp again, though it goes by other names whispered under the scent of lotus and frankincense. You follow a procession winding into a temple courtyard. The drums are low, the chants steady. A priest carries a bronze censer, its chain clinking like tiny secrets. The smoke spilling out looks like silk until it hits your face. Then it stings slightly, sharp and earthy. You blink. This isn't just fancy incense. Ancient scrolls speak of shemshemet, a plant both medicinal and mystical, believed by modern scholars to be an early Egyptian reference to cannabis. Whether the high priests realized its full range of effects, historians still argue whether they used it for worship or wound care. The presence of its fibers and extracts across the Nile world leaves little doubt that someone, somewhere knew its comfort. You trail after the smoke inside. The walls are covered in hieroglyphs. Hawks, eyes, rivers, stars, each line carved by someone who probably never got enough sleep. The priests murmur invocations to Hathor, goddess of music and pleasure. The air tastes like honey and ash. For a second, you glimpse how spiritual this could feel, a controlled haze meant to bridge mortals and gods. Or maybe it's just excellent ventilation designed by candlelight engineers. A mainstream historical fact drifts into focus. Egyptian medical papyri, especially the Ebers papyrus, mention preparations using hemp for inflammation and pain relief. They didn't exactly say, apply weed and chill, but close enough. Scholars interpret lines describing crushed plant paste applied to sores or mixed into oils for childbirth recovery. The plant had already made its move from smoke to salve. Egypt turned cannabis into medicine long before pharmacy chains existed. You watch a healer near the temple doorway grind seeds with oil, murmuring a recipe. Nearby stands a woman holding a jar patterned with blue lotus petals. She offers it to the healer, who dips fingers in and traces a pattern over her shoulder. Maybe ritual, maybe treatment, you can't tell. The moment feels both medical and magical. Then comes a curious twist from the fringes of archaeology. Some tomes held pipes and rolling cones made of reeds. While they could have been for simple incense, residue analysis on similar artifacts from neighboring regions hints at burned cannabis resin. The idea that pharaohs or priests inhaled herbal smoke under starlight isn't wild speculation. It's plausible. Historians still argue whether this practice was limited to temple rites or included recreational giggles behind palace walls. You can almost imagine a royal guard sneezing mid-ceremony, trying not to look too spiritually enthusiastic. Walk with me now down the banks at twilight. A fisherman drags his net ashore, his rope glints green gold. Hemp again. It binds the ship masts, wraps jars, strengthens sandals. For the working classes, hemp isn't mystical, it's just sturdy, everyday stuff. But even that ordinary connection carries quiet reverence. Egyptians saw interlinking between practical and divine. The plant saving your labor could also soothe your pain or carry songs to heaven. A breeze stirs, a brushing sand over half-buried statues. Somewhere in a nearby village, a burial is taking place. Family members burn sweet herbs to aid the soul's rise. You smell faint cannabis sweetness under the mix, an ancient equivalent of lighting one for the road. Death here isn't final, it's logistical. And having a pleasant aroma helps with the paperwork, spiritually speaking. Through your drowsy imagination, scenes layer together: priests tending oil lamps, a farmer's twisting ropes, queens bathing in scented oils possibly laced with hemp. Modern researchers found traces of cannabis pollen in mummified hair and linens, though contamination is always the skeptic's easy excuse. Still, imagine being wrapped in cloth infused with calming plant essences, the original aromatherapy long before spa playlists. You pass a wall painting showing a goddess with a sistrum rattle and a wide grin. In the corner, a small jar painted green, maybe artistic coincidence, or an inside joke by the artisan who knew exactly what fragrant oil meant. Humor can outlive even dynasties, after all. Another fringe rumor trickles through time that the priests of Sichat, patroness of writing, sometimes used inspiration incense before recording complex star charts. Maybe the act of stretching consciousness made pattern recognition easier, or maybe ancient astrologers just wanted an excuse to stay awake under desert skies. Either way, your eyelids droop at the thought. As dusk thickens, the torches along the temple wall flicker. The chants fade, sand cools under your feet. You realize how modern this all feels. The same blend of faith, medicine, and curiosity. Every civilization adds its own mystique to the same plant, dressing it in new symbolism. Here it is scarab gold, later it'll be hashish green. But the heartbeat remains identical. Humans, seeking equilibrium between body and spirit, stumble across an herb that seems to whisper, breathe, slow down. You step away from the temple, the smell of incense still trailing behind like invisible sunk. The night opens wide over the Nile, stars glittering across a mirror of dark water. Somewhere beyond that horizon waits another culture ready to reinterpret the smoke again. Persians with poets, mystics, and maybe the first debates over whether cosmic insight is a side effect or the whole point. For now, you stand quiet, half dreaming, the desert humming lullabies older than memory itself. You open your eyes to another world, quieter, steadier, perfumed with rosewater instead of sweat and sand. The wind carries whispers through an orchard of cypress and pomegranate trees. Somewhere nearby, water trickles from a carved stone fountain, making musical patterns as it falls. The air feels deliberate, almost meditative. You're in ancient Persia, around the age when Zoroastrian priests talk directly to stars, and the rest of society tries not to disturb them. The entire empire is poised between blazing deserts and celestial philosophy. A priest robed in white gestures you closer. His face is sharp, serene, and framed by a beard that probably took divine patience to grow. In his hand, a small bronze bowl of herbs smolders. The scent is familiar now, that earthy sweetness you've traced from the steppe to the Nile. Soma, he calls it. Though scholars later debate whether soma here is the same legendary drink of enlightenment sung in older Indo-Iranian hymns. You kneel beside him as pale smoke unfurls upward, a thin silver road between matter and spirit. The ceremony begins not with chanting but with silence, just breathing in. A mainstream fact glows here. References from Persian Avestan texts describe plant infusions connected to ritual revelation. Some passages imply cannabis like plants played a role in preparing sacred elixirs used during mystical ceremonies. Whether these mixtures truly contain THC-rich material or were symbolic holy herbs, historians still argue whether divine inspiration was natural or pharmacological. Either way, you start to feel a slow dilation of time, as if the world blinks in half speed. The man beside you murmurs lines to Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. His tone feels like a low hum under your ribs. You close your eyes. The smoke moves differently here. Methodical, restrained. These aren't Scythian nomads yelling joyfully intense. These are contemplative alchemists, dissecting the invisible. Their goal isn't euphoria, but revelation, a purity achieved through equilibrium, thought sharpened like geometry. You can't help but suspect that many ancient insights might have included at least mild herbal encouragement. In fringe circles, another story lingers, a myth of a divine bridge called Chinvat, which souls must cross after death. Some archaeological fragments suggest that psychoactive fumes, possibly including cannabis, were believed to help priests simulate this crossing in life, glimpsing beyond and returning wiser. It's equal parts theology and timid adventuring, a safe cosmic sneak peek. Imagine using your mind as a rehearsal stage for eternity. You stroll further through the garden. Scholars etched astronomical tables here centuries before telescopes. Somewhere in a shaded alcove, students grind leaves, mixing them with milk and poppy tincture for ritual sips. It smells both grassy and sweet, somewhere between incense and dessert. You try not to laugh at how universal the secret recipe. Vibe feels like every civilization eventually invents a spiritual smoothie. Nearby, a poet recites verses about fire and longing. His voice is soft, wary from too much insight. The lines pulse with contradiction, pleasure versus order, a body versus flame. Persia thrives on such opposites. Here you learn that spiritual intoxication isn't shameful. It's coded as yearning for divine union. So intoxicants that blur boundaries between human and cosmic become almost metaphors played out literally. That subtle blending of sacred and sensory will echo through Sufi poetry centuries later, when mystics write of being drunk on the beloved, and maybe, just maybe, mean it both ways. You sit beneath a fig tree, eyes half closed. Bees thrum lazily overhead. A young apprentice approaches, offering you a clay cup of milk, infused, you suspect, with that same plant essence. You taste bitterness first, then warmth spreading through limbs like slow honey. The edges of the fountain ripple. Light turns liquid. The apprentice laughs at your expression, saying something that roughly translates to, "The gods hide knowledge in the plants, not in scrolls." A stone lizard scurries by, perfectly oblivious to revelations. You realize the human need for meaning might just be evolution's most creative side effect. Still, there's beauty in the discipline here. Unlike later hedonistic scenes, Persians wrap their intoxication in ceremony, geometry, music of silence. The plant serves as key, not king. A mainstream debate whispers through time were the Magi. Yes, the same ones whose distant descendants would visit baby Jesus. Early users of psychoactive fumigation rites. Some historians say yes, pointing to ritual fires described in both Zoroastrian and earlier Indo-Aryan traditions. Others reject it, insisting their ecstasies came from contemplation alone. Historians still argue whether those visionary accounts stemmed from chemistry, holiness, or clever literary metaphors. You just shrug mentally and watch the smoke do mathematics above the brazier. The garden around you deepens into twilight. Every lantern looks like a floating ember. Musicians pluck soft strings, voices murmur philosophical riddles. You catch one. If all fire comes from the same flames, why fear what burns? It's the kind of line that could start 1,000 late-night conversations or one really confusing podcast. There's a gentle humor in realizing that entire priesthoods once hotboxed temples in the name of cosmic order. But it's also oddly peaceful. Their restraint, their commitment to meaning, wraps around you like warm air. The last priest waves his smoking bowl toward the stars, thanking the heavens for the bridge between seen and unseen. You think tomorrow we'll see another civilization build the bridge differently, with more noise, more color, and a measure of holy chaos. You leave the orchard as moonlight maps silver lines on water. The air retains that faint perfume of herbs, a balance between science and dream. Somewhere east, the noise of drums and river bells calls again. India waits, with chants, elephants, and a sacred drink that refuses to disappear, no matter how many centuries try. You wake up to rhythms instead of silence. Hand drums, temple bells, the hum of countless voices layering like waves. It's dawn in ancient India, where the air tastes of sandalwood and butter smoke. Along the riverbanks, saffron-robed figures chant as the first orange light spills over everything, and that smell, woody, strange, faintly sweet, drifts again. Beneath it lies the familiar trace of cannabis, though here it carries another name entirely: bhang, the sacred drink blessed by gods and poured for mortals. You step closer. Someone grinds green leaves and buds on a smooth stone, mixing the paste into warm milk, sprinkling in spices. The result looks innocent, a spring-colored drink swirled with devotion. But when it touches your lips, there's a slow spreading hum, as if the river itself flows through your veins. Around you, laughter bubbles easily. Everyone feels lighter, like the sun has shifted inside them. Throughout Hindu mythology, cannabis isn't evil, it's divine. Mainstream fact for tonight's lullabying legend says the god Shiva discovered the plant, resting beneath it after cosmic wanderings. When he crushed its leaves and drank the essence, peace returned to his restless mind. Since then, devotees drink bhang in his honor, especially during Holi, the festival of color and chaos. Historians still argue whether these tales describe literal intoxication or symbolic transcendence, but you suspect a bit of both. Spiritual metaphors have a habit of tasting suspiciously herbal. Children chase each other nearby with handfuls of dyed powder. Someone tosses a blue cloud that settles on your shoulders. A drummer keeps perfect time, or maybe time keeps perfect drummer. You breathe in rhythm. India's relationship with cannabis feels both seamless and ancient, woven into medicine, meditation, sensual poetry, and cosmic philosophy alike. The plant dissolves boundaries, making no distinction between the earthly and the divine. A fringe tidbit bubbles up hug in some tantric sects. Initiates once consumed chillum smoke to heighten focus during elaborate rituals. The body, considered an instrument of the universe, had to experience everything: pain, sweetness, intoxication, to reach ultimate balance. Nothing forbidden, everything instructive. For the uninitiated, that meant a dizzy head. For the adept, maybe revelation, or a really memorable nap. You wander into a quiet ashram, where monks sit cross-legged, eyes half-masked. Incense coils lazily upward. You're trying not to cough. Your modern lungs weren't built for constant aromatic assault. The teacher opens one eye, catches your expression, and almost smiles. He speaks softly, to still the mind. Sometimes it must move first. You nod, pretending to understand completely, and then feel the world blur gently around the edges. From medicine scrolls like the Atharva Veda, a cannabis appears not merely recreational but medicinal, described as one of the 5 sacred plants that relieve anxiety. The verses call it a source of happiness, a bringer of freedom. The phrasing feels timeless. Somewhere between prescription and prayer, bhang became the planet's first antidepressant smoothie. You cross a shaded courtyard where women crush herbs in stone mortars. Some portions become salves for pain, others join the festive vats for joy. Nobody worries about legality. Morality here flows with utility and ritual meaning. The same plant serving pain relief also fuels laughter in the streets. There's a comfort in that honesty. No separation between health and happiness, only balance. A few travelers from the western deserts pass by, their tongues awkward around Sanskrit syllables but their curiosity sharp. They'll carry these seeds and customs westward soon, along the trade routes that will knit together Asia and the Middle East. What you witness now is the plant's spiritual adolescence, preparing for its next migration, but that's far ahead. Tonight, the focus stays on the presenting. Sacred ghee lamps floating on dark river water, the air heavy with drums and devotion. The river spreads wide like glass beneath starlight. You follow the devotees down to its edge. Each person dips a small clay bowl in water, lowers it, lets it ride the current. The floating lights drift away, bobbing gently like sleepy fireflies. The entire scene sways to a cosmic heartbeat. Somewhere a poet recites lines that drift halfway between flirtation and philosophy. His eyes are unfocused, his grin lazy. Maybe he's just tired, maybe blissed. It's impossible to tell. Cannabis here is multitasking, part aphrodisiac, part sedative, part philosopher's prop. No one feels the need to categorize it neatly. Historians still argue whether the original soma drink of Indo-Aryan myth was actually cannabis, a mix of poppy, or a long-lost mountain shrub. The consensus fluctuates like the river itself, but the symbolism remains. Divinity revealed through plants. Each sip, each whiff, is a reminder that consciousness isn't a prison, it's a playground. You close your eyes, the chanting's dissolving into soft hums. Somewhere in the haze of sound and scent, you sense the universal rhythm connecting all those ancient fires you've visited. Step tents, temple courtyards, Persian gardens, and now this molten dawn by the Ganges. The smoke threads them together, century by century, whispering the same lullaby. Humans reaching for meaning one inhale at a time. The night cools. The crowd drifts homeward, robes fluttering in soft wind. You feel the faintest smile tug at your face, thinking how this boring history has turned warm and bright in your mind. Tomorrow, new lands. China's apothecaries and healers waiting with jars of dried leaves, recipe scrolls, and yet another version of the same smoky miracle. But first, sleep. You blink awake to gray-blue dawn light filtering through paper windows. Outside, bamboo leaves sway, dripping with mist. The world smells faintly of rain, earth, and distant cooking fires. You're in ancient China now, where medicine is philosophy, and observation is practically a religion. The sound of grinding stone pulls you toward a small courtyard where an old healer, wrapped in faded silk, mixes powders in perfect rhythms. He doesn't look up as you approach. Hemp seed, he says plainly, his voice like dry tea leaves, to nourish the yin. That's your first clue here. Cannabis isn't a curiosity or a mystical party trick. It's part of the medical landscape, centuries before microscopes. Mainstream historical fact. By around 2700 BCE, the legendary Emperor Shen Nung, China's mythical father of agriculture and medicine, listed cannabis in his pharmacopoeia, praising it for its ability to treat gout, malaria, and memory loss. Historians still argue whether Shen Nung was an actual person or a symbolic composite of early scientific tradition, but his book, the Pen Ti Sao Ching, became the textbook of herbal healing for millennia. You kneel beside the healer's table. He opens a jar of dried greenish leaves, fibrous, faintly aromatic, far less potent than anything you've seen in later centuries. The smoke isn't the story here, the seed and oil are. Dishes made with hemp seed oil are daily nutrition, not rebellion. China has long known this plant's virtue, but uses it to balance energies, not moods. You might say they discovered the hemp industry long before the hemp lifestyle. Still, curiosity always lurks. Some ancient Taoist texts mention morphine, a substance derived from the flowering tops, capable of producing light-headed calm and mild hallucination when overused. The tone feels more advisory than enthusiastic. Small doses cure, large doses confuse. You imagine wary herbalists testing limits, pupils dilating like lanterns, muttering, for research purposes only. A fringe tidbit lingers in certain scrolls that sorcerers used high doses in divination rituals to communicate with spirits, whether that meant dead ancestors or just a creative imagination. Historians still argue whether such rituals were medicinal experiments or spiritual theater. You wander into the apothecary's inner rooms. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, packed with herbs, seeds, bones, and powders. Ancient storage that somehow still smells like possibility. The healer takes a pinch of hemp flower, sprinkles it onto a tiny brazier, then wafts the smoke across a bowl of water. The scent is faintly grassy, peaceful. Purification, he murmurs. Too much fire makes anger. This moves fire away. That's the Taoist worldview in a nutshell. Life explained through 5 elements constantly seeking balance, and herbs as their negotiators. In this quietly methodical world, cannabis doesn't lead people to song, it leads them to equilibrium. You sense the cultural tone shift, no holy intoxication, no rowdy campfires, just precise pragmatism. Even pleasure serves harmony. You sip tea and notice the difference. The focus on moderation itself feels hypnotic. But China being China, innovation finds its sneaky paths. Hemp paper, invented during the Han Dynasty, spreads knowledge faster than the plant grows. People start writing about everything. including, ironically, recipes for better hemp cultivation. The same plant that fuels spiritual ecstasies elsewhere becomes the backbone of bureaucracy here. Imagine the global irony. Future laws restricting cannabis will probably be printed on hemp's own descendants. You stroll through the market streets. Ropes, sandals, fishnets, all woven from hemp. Children kick around a hemp fiber ball. A woman at a stall sells tiny cakes made from hemp seeds and honey. You try one, it's chewy, nutty, oddly satisfying. The everyday acceptance of this plant feels refreshing, no stigma, no hype. It's as casually vital as rice or tea. Then comes a rumor circulating around scholars' inns of mountain hermits who brew special elixirs seeking immortality. Some claim their potions include the psychoactive tops of hemp. One's breath, they say, should mingle with heaven's vapor. You imagine them meditating until they forget which side of human they started on. Their experiments might have ended in brief flights of insight, or confusion measured in centuries, but their persistence left fingerprints on Chinese alchemy, the same trends that will later birth gunpowder and porcelain. Smoke transforms, sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically. Even mainstream sources admit that Han-era physicians prescribed hemp preparations for pain, especially during surgeries. The anesthetic combination of hemp and wine appears in recorded invention by Hia Tu, the surgeon sometimes called the father of Chinese surgery. He supposedly used this mixture called mafi sand to knock patients out before operating. Whether this was true anesthesia or later legend, historians still argue whether ancient medical cannabis truly rendered unconsciousness or simply made people too relaxed to protest. Either way, that's innovation born from empathy, a rare combination in early healthcare. Afternoon unfolds. A boy runs through the street, his kite shaped like a crane. Its string, of course, spun from hemp. You glance upward, clouds drift slow, like they've inhaled something mellow themselves. It strikes you that civilization here built itself around moderation and longevity, while the same plant elsewhere stirred ecstasy and rebellion. Context shapes medicine more than chemistry ever could. As dusk creeps in, you follow the healer up a nearby hill lined with cypress trees. At the peak stands a small shrine facing the setting sun. He kneels, lights dried herbs on a clay plate, and the wind carries the faint curl of gray toward the horizon. The fragrance hovers between medicinal and spiritual, nature refusing to choose sides again. He turns to you, eyes soft. Balance, he says. Even smoke must return to earth. You realize how every civilization so far has used this plant to teach whatever lesson it already believed in: energy, ritual, health, connection. The plant isn't the story, it's the mirror. You leave the healer to his twilight prayers. Lanterns bloom below like amber seeds scattered across villages. The scent follows you down herbal, steady, ancient. Beyond the mountains, philosophy will soon give way to debate once more. The Greeks are waiting with their eternally restless curiosity, ready to turn simple smoke into argument itself. The bright geometric streets of ancient Greece stretch around you like sunlit puzzles. Marble courtyards, terracotta pots, and voices that sound like debates even when ordering lunch. Here, the world lives in perpetual argument about beauty, truth, whether olives or grapes matter more. Somewhere in the chaos, another smoke curls quietly through conversation. The same familiar plant, now dressed in philosophy. You walk through the agora, sandals slapping warm stones. Merchants shout, philosophers pace, and everyone seems to be philosophically late for something. A bearded man waves a scroll in one hand and a cup of wine in the other. He spots you and grins, motioning toward a shaded colonnade. Come, join our symposium. We explore pleasure and virtue today. His tone suggests more experiment than lecture. Inside, the air hums with arguments and incense. The mix of frankincense and something musky makes your nose twitch. On the table sits a small bronze brazier filled with glowing embers. Someone tosses a clump of dried herb onto the heat. A thin aromatic cloud rises, earthy, curious, not quite frankincense. You glance at your host. He winks. Imported. From Scythia. For philosophical clarity. There it is again, weed, wandering into new territory through trade routes and curiosities. A mainstream historical fact in Greek historians like Herodotus, the same guy who once wrote about Scythian steam tents, may have indirectly imported those stories home. While there's minimal direct evidence of cannabis smoking in classical Athens, hemp and its fibers were well known for rope and oil, and occasional medicinal uses were noted by early physicians such as Dioscorides centuries later. Whether they used it for fun or focus, historians still argue whether classical Greeks actually inhaled psychoactive cannabis or merely enjoyed imported tales of those who did. Still, speculation makes good company. Someone quotes Epicurus, claiming moderate pleasure maintains harmony. Another insists Socrates would frown on escapism. What is virtue? One asked. If you borrow it from plants. The group bursts into laughter because every Greek conversation eventually becomes a drinking game disguised as ethics. You take a breath, leaning back against cool stone. The air thickens, pottery clinks. The laughter sounds distant, lazy. One painter at the end of the table sketches vines spiraling around a lyre. His strokes erratic but oddly graceful. Maybe it's the smoke, maybe just his confidence. Outside, olive trees shimmer in sunlight. Hemp grows among them, cultivated across the region largely for ropes, fishnets, and sailcloth. Shipbuilders depend on it. Without hemp, no triremes, no expeditions, no Plato griping about Atlantis. You realize hemp quietly underpins the infrastructure that keeps philosophers afloat, literally. But the Greeks never ignore potential symbolism. Some believe fumes aid prophecy at oracles, especially in rural sanctuaries where incense mixtures blur medicinal herbs with mystery. The fringes of Greek religion always smell interesting. You imagine the Delphic priestess breathing a medley of geological vapors, maybe touched with herbal smoke, murmuring riddles so poetic they still baffle scholars. Historians still argue whether she was intoxicated or inspired, or both on a really good day. You wander through a side alley toward the harbor. Ropes twist like sleeping serpents, each strand hemp and gold. A sailor greets you with a nod, rolling a piece between his fingers. Best from Crete, he brags. Stronger than any imported nonsense. He could be talking about cable tension or THC. The ambiguity suits him. That's the beauty of Greek double meanings. Every trade has a metaphor. Every metaphor smells faintly of sea salt and olive oil. Later that evening, you follow a group of revelers up the Acropolis. Torches flicker. Somebody plays the aulos, twin flutes that squeal like delighted ghosts. The party is dedicated to Dionysus, which usually means wine spills faster than conversation. Yet amid the chaotic joy, small bowls of mixed herbs burn beside the amphorae. Offerings, someone whispers before another adds, and aromatherapy for courage. You breathe it in, the ancient equivalent of crowd ambience. Jasmine, resin, and a whiff of the same creeping calm through centuries. For a moment, the loud laughter, the dancing shadows, the hot wind, all fuse into something cosmic. The Greeks, lovers of balance, knew pleasure needed philosophy, and philosophy needed occasional liberation. A fringe anecdote catches your wandering mind. Some later Hellenistic physicians claimed hemp seeds quench lust when eaten in quantity. Possibly early birth control, possibly fake news from jealous philosophers. Either way, the contrast is delightful. A plant blamed in one society for too much pleasure, now accused of providing too little. Humanity's relationship with cannabis has always been one long feedback loop of irony. By now the fire burns low. The philosopher from earlier reclines beside you, eyes half closed. He sighs. Knowledge is heavy. Sometimes you must let smoke carry it for you. You nod, pretending that makes immediate sense. In the distance, waves strike the shore rhythmically, like nature applauding the world's longest debate. As dawn peels the sky open, Athens yawns awake again. Debates resuming mid-sentence. Scribes gather hemp sheets for writing, sailors coil hemp ropes for voyages, and a few leftover revelers sip watered wines. Trying to recall conclusions no one agreed upon, you feel the familiar thread reappear. The same plant, always adapting to a culture's personality. Among warriors it was celebration, among priests revelation, among philosophers conversation fuel. Somewhere ahead, the Romans are staging their empire. Prepping banquets and marble glamour, they'll adopt and remodel everything Greek, including the subtle smokes and practical fibers. History exhales and rolls forward, one civilization handing the next a faintly perfumed scroll. The next breath you take smells of olive oil, salt, and roasted garlic, not exactly sacred incense but definitely divine in its own way. You've crossed from the noisy logic of Greece into the marble-lined decadence of Rome. The empire hums with motioning sandals on cobblestone, chariots rattling, fountains whispering Latin over rushing water, and somewhere in that sensory overload, you notice a familiar hue of green. Hemp again, thick-stemmed and useful, thriving in fields outside the city walls like an underappreciated laborer. Rome doesn't romanticize the plant. Rome employs it. Hemp is rope, sail, and fabric. Legionaries wear hemp shoes. Ships depend on its fibers to keep their hot-tempered gods of navigation pleased. Hemp even shows up in household medicine chests. Mainstream history confirms this. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder praised hemp for treating earaches and easing pain, describing methods so matter-of-fact you'd think he was listing bread recipes. Historians still argue whether Roman cannabis carried enough punch for psychoactive recreation, or if people only inhaled minimal fumes during incense burning. If pleasure happened, it probably arrived disguised as aromatic therapy. You walk into a courtyard shaded with lemon trees. A patrician reclines on a couch, glittering togas draped loosely, servants weaving garlands from hemp leaves. You blink. Leaves, not flowers, yet symbolic enough that a put nearby jokes. A garland's for the gods of laughter. Everyone chuckles. Romans had artful sarcasm even about plants. In an age when everything demanded symbolism, hemp's unpretentious versatility came as comic relief. Dinner follows spectacle. Platters of grapes, figs, honey, roasted meat. Someone pours Falernian wine. Another burns spices near the table to mask any smells from the street. These early diffusers often included resinous herbs imported from far provinces. A faint sweetness drifts through the air. You can't swear it's cannabis, but after 8 sections of traveling smoke, your imagination refuses to rule it out. You catch a conversation between 2 wealthy guests, half serious. One claims Egyptian healers sell oil from the sacred herb that banishes sorrows. The other grunts, we have senators for that. Laughter erupts. Politics apparently always pairs well with cynicism and inebriation. Yet not all Romans were skeptical. Some rural shrines treat hemp smoke as purifier. Farmers burn it around livestock pens, saying it drives away insects and spirits in one sweep. The line between pesticide and prayer blurs easily in Roman religion. Even in that practicality there's reverence. The plant wards off both flies and fate. You wander later to the forum, torchlight glossing the columns. Merchants from the east unpack goods as silks, spices, resin balls sealed in wax. Among them, a slow-talking Phoenician sells cloth dyed deep green, claiming it keeps away weariness when worn close to skin. Hemp cloth from the Indus Valley, he adds proudly. Trade routes have made cannabis a true global citizen, traveling further than most Roman consuls ever will. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your sleepy thoughts. Archaeologists once found traces of burned hemp seeds at a villa site in Pompeii, suggesting, perhaps, domestic relaxation slightly less innocent than rope making. Historians still argue whether these remains result from ceremonial incense or some long-lost culinary experiment. Maybe the eruption of Vesuvius froze the world mid-moment, capturing not decadence but downtime. You picture a Roman reclining on a mosaic bench, exhaling slowly as the sky darkened, not knowing ash would immortalize their vibe forever. Night deepens over the city. The streets, once clamorous, settle into murmurs and footsteps. From a nearby tavern comes muffled laughter, lyre music, and the unmistakable crack of burning herbs. You peek through the doorway. Sailors, a few philosophers on budget holiday, and a woman in bright red shawl telling fortunes with smoke trails. See how it curls left. The gods are restless. They laugh until tears glint under lamplight. The warmth feels timeless. Humanity's favorite evening recipe fire. Stories, maybe something mildly questionable in the air. Step outside again. The moon reflects in the aqueducts like slow-moving silver. You realize Rome's genius wasn't inventing pleasures. It was institutionalizing them. Even relaxation came with architecture. The cannabis fit neatly into that structure, small, functional, quietly everywhere. No hysteria, no cult. Just inclusion in the daily sprawl of empire. The plant, adaptable as ever, learned to behave itself among engineers and administrators. Yet under that order, rebellion always whispers. Poets mutter about longings. Slaves sneak away to festivals. And somewhere along the Tiber, a healer murmurs to the goddess Flora, tossing dried hemp into the breeze. The smoke rises gracefully. Maybe for fertility, maybe just to remind the night that nature still has a vote in Rome's grand design. As dawn cracks pink along the horizon, you leave the city gates. Farmers are already waking, fields alive with cicadas. Hemp sways tall, dew purling on its leaves like simmering jewels. That same crop will become sales paper, oil, And one day controversy. You touch a stalk, rough yet yielding, and it feels like shaking hands with history itself. Always flexible, never gone. The road stretches north, pulling you toward drums and wind instruments, toward lands whose identity shapes rhythm instead of stone. You feel distant echoes of flutes, laughter, and ritual. Africa calling next, where the plant will take on whole new meaning: song, healing, and ancestral conversation. You adjust your cloak, step into the long morning light, and let the empire recede behind you. The air thickens, switching from Mediterranean salt to humid green. You hear insects first, the endless chorus of buzz and click that underscores African twilight. You follow sound and scent across centuries, landing in a village where drums talk louder than words and smoke drifts lazily over clay rooftops. The river nearby glows copper with sunset. Somewhere behind the beat of life, cannabis has found yet another translation for itself. Here the plant doesn't arrive dressed in philosophy or marble luxury. It grows wild along the hillsides, tall, unruly, and sturdy as the people tending it. Hemp fibers twist into fishing nets beside drying gourds. In a corner of the village, a pot boils something earthy and sweet. A local elder, smile deep as history, stirs the mixture with a wooden spoon. She waves you closer. Smoke to the spirits, she says, voice crackling like kindling. For wisdom, for laughter. Mainstream historians have found early pipes and pottery residues showing cannabis use across parts of sub-Saharan Africa, dating near the 1st millennium BCE. Whether imported from Asia through trade or growing local relatives, it joined community rituals early. Historians still argue whether its spread came through Egyptian influence down the Nile or along Indian Ocean trade winds. But somewhere between caravan and canoe, the seeds rooted deeply. You sit cross-legged among villagers as the night ceremony unfolds. Drummers gather, hands flashing in rhythm under firelight. A calabash pipe passes around, smoke curls blue into the dark. The mood isn't worship or intoxication, but something in between. Connection. Each exhale feels like punctuation in a collective sentence. And when laughter bursts, it's deep, belly-anchored, pulling even you along. A fringe story drifts your way from a storyteller with beads tangled in his beard. He insists that in the old time, a hunter followed smoke rising from a forest fire and found talking animals around its edge, each one offering him counsel. A cannabist, the storyteller adds, was their gift so that humans would remember joy after sorrow. You nod because, honestly, it sounds perfectly plausible by now. Every civilization so far has invented its own version of this, mything the plant as teacher rather than vice. The elder hands you the pipe. The bowl's carved from soapstone polished by countless palms. You take a cautious inhale. The smoke is rough but fragrant, carrying hints of resin and ash. The drumbeat seems to slow, not because the drummer stopped, but because your perception stretches between strokes. Flames blur into spirals. Someone nearby starts singing in minor tones. Another answers with laughter. Communication here doesn't require perfect sanity, only shared rhythm. In this world, cannabis serves as mediator between seen and unseen. Healers use it in small doses to cool the body or drive out pain. Dancers use it to shed hesitation before trance rituals. Farmers light it at dusk to mark gratitude for rains. There's no division between medical and spiritual, just life. The plant, like everything else, wears multiple hats: healer, companion, comedian. You wander toward the edge of the celebration where traders unpack goods beside ox carts. Their fabrics show Eastern designs, evidence of trade blooming from Arabia, India, and beyond. One merchant describes using the plant as journey medicining, keeps the steps light, keeps the mind traveling even when the feet do not. You smile. That should be printed on a modern poster somewhere. The African continent's diversity of methods astounds you. In some coastal regions, water pipes cool the smoke through calabashes. Inland, rolled leaves and improvised chillums carry the same function. The common thread gathering. No solitary smoking philosophers here. Just circles of breath, shared stories, and slow dissolving boundaries between people. A mainstream anthropological find tickles your memory. Pipe fragments from Ethiopia and southern Africa containing traces matching cannabis resins. Scholars connect them to ritual healing ceremonies and initiation festivals. Yet historians still argue whether these traces represented high-potency psychoactive strains or low-resin medicinal crops. Scientific caution aside, Anyone who's heard these drums tonight would understand the emotional truth better than chemical data. People found peace through rhythm and herb long before laboratory names existed. Heat builds around the fire. The villagers begin a final dance, swirling skirts and shaking bracelets of shells. You're swept in before you can protest. The beat controls your pulse, you move clumsily but sincerely. The rhythm forgives you. Sweat meets smoke, shimmer meeting shimmer. The night hums approval. Later, as embers fade, the older sits again beside you. Inhale, she says softly, then listen, you do. The silence afterward feels enormous but kind, cradling every heartbeat. Good, she continues. That's what remembering feels like. You're not sure whether she means memory of ancestors, of your journey, or simply how to be present. A dog barks somewhere. Crickets resume their midnight arguments. The village settles under a sky thick with constellations so bright they look near enough to touch. You realize that everywhere you've gone, this plant has behaved like a tuning fork. Different notes, same vibration. Here its hum deepens, blending seamlessly with the earth's. Tomorrow, trade winds will carry you north again, to caravans crossing deserts, to merchants and mystics moving goods and ideas between worlds. The Silk Roads are almost ready to open, and with them, hemp's chance to become global luggage. But tonight, you stay by the fire, letting smoke drift upward like invisible threads sewing one continent into another. You're half asleep when you notice the air has changed again. Drier, thinner, tinged with dust. When you open your eyes, the world stretches in long golden ribbons of sand. You hear bells clinking, camels groaning patiently, and the faint tinkle of something cooking over a portable fire. The smell, smoke, spice sweat, announces that you've arrived on history's most famous highway, the Silk Road. Across these routes, hemp and hashish don't belong to one place anymore. They're both product and passenger, packed in sacks with silk, pepper, and philosophical ideas. Traders lead caravans from China's western rim through Persia into Mesopotamia and further still. Every stop adds its flavor: Chinese practicality, Indian sacredness, Persian mystery. By the time the smoke curls under a Central Asian sunrise, it's multicultural bliss. A merchant from Bactria welcomes you with predictable charm. He's bold, sunburnt, and entirely unbothered by distance. From his pouch, he produces little resinous cakes, dark and fragrant. Good for stiff joints, he says with a grin suggesting he means both literal and metaphorical. You take one between your fingers. It smells faintly like pine, mixed with something sweet. The recipe traveled farther than most languages. Mainstream fact check for your sleepy brain: by the 1st century's BCCE, cannabis products, fibers, seeds, and resin were traded throughout Asia. Archaeologists have found hemp fiber cloth in western China's Tarim Basin and hashish residue in Central Asian burial sites. Historians still argue whether this diffusion owed more to military garrisons seeking rope or to mystics chasing visions. Both sound equally plausible standing under this open sky. The campfire flares as spices roast in an iron pot. Traders lounge around breaking bread, comparing hardship stories in 10 different languages. One man tosses a pinch of something onto the flames, a familiar grassy scent, then leans back with a satisfied hum. From India, he explains, sacred, safe for dreams. The others laugh knowingly, though the laughter soon slows into peaceful murmurs. Even without a shared dictionary, humanity knows what mellow feels like. You stretch out beside a bundle of silk. Overhead, constellations blaze impossibly bright. This isn't a landscape built for walls or secrets. Every direction is invitation. You think about how smoke, too, ignores borders. It rises, drifts, and transforms, perfect merchant style. A fringe tale floats through conversation somewhere east of Samarkand. A monastery of wandering ascetics consumes a special, sky paste, before meditation, claiming it lets them walk invisible among gods. Whether exaggeration or exceptional marketing, traders love repeating it. The story sells easily. A few scrolls centuries later will call this practice alchemy. A few clerics will call it sin. Time, always the best PR manager, edits these contradictions as needed. You wander through the encampment, watching the practical uses appear beside the mystical ones. Hemp ropes tie down tents. Hemp oil lamps blink awake in the wind. Soldiers on horseback rub hemp paste into saddle sores. The caravan's survival depends on this humble weed more than anyone admits. Even empire runs smoother on sturdy twine. A few men near the edge of camp begin reciting verses. Snatches of Persian poetry already shaping into what will later be mystic Sufi rhymes. Their lines drift betrayed gossip and philosophy. Every road hides another within its dust. Another replies, "So let us follow the smoke, it always finds heaven." Laughter, applause, another pinch tossed into the fire. You realize the Silk Road is not one road at all, but a vein system pulsing through civilization, carrying more than goods. Ideas, art, addiction, hope, they all pass along like whispered messages. Cannabis rides quietly among these currents, small enough to hide in a pocket, but powerful enough to anchor memory between borders. Morning comes pink and windless. Camels groan themselves upright, or bells chiming monotone music. You walk alongside them for a bit, the endless horizon shimmering. A rider beside you explains that hemp fibers woven into their reins last months longer than others. Then he squints conspiratorially, and if one grows tired on long roads, he trails off, patting a putch at his side. You get the implication. Universal solutions travel fastest. There's humor even in exhaustion. At one stop, a cook accidentally spills resin powder into dough. The resulting flatbread, sticky fragrance, euphoric, keeps everyone surprisingly optimistic through a sandstorm. Historians still argue whether this marks the origin of hash edibles or just a lucky mess. Either way, morale skyrocketed. By dusk, you reach a caravanserai, half fortress, half motel. Spice and sweat perfume the courtyard. Travelers share food, patch wounds, tell half-true stories. Someone plays a stringed instrument that sounds halfway between Indian sitar and Arabic oud. Each string vibrates like the highway itself. Within that music, you sense the essence of the plant's journey so far, never static, always blending, breathing, adapting. The night cools. You sit under archways carved with faded floral patterns. From a distant room comes mild laughter, the smoky scent of burned herbs, and a single universal sound, contented sigh. Civilization, at this stage, seems united less by borders than by that exact tone of relief. When dawn edges in again, you know the trail will soon reach the cities of faiths. Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, where scholars and mystics will battle over plant-based ecstasies with pen, prayer, and prohibition orders. But for now, here between tents and stars, everything still feels borderless. One continuous exhale across continents. You yawn, tug the blanket close, hear the wind brush your tent flap like a lullaby. The Silk Road hums outside, tireless yet tranquil. The world spins softly under its smoke. A candle flickers, throwing nervous shadows across stone walls. The desert is gone. Now you're somewhere medieval, nestled inside a monastery courtyard that smells of parchment, honey bread, and secrecy. The air is still cool from the night, and you hear the steady drip of water through an aqueduct. Robes rustle. The world feels hushed, like it's holding its breath for 1,000 years. The monk who guides you has kind eyes and a voice that always sounds like a confession. He leads you into the infirmary, a small room filled with jars, bandages, and herbs hanging upside down from wooden beams. Some are familiar in mint, sage, lavender, but one bundle, greener and coarser than the rest, catches your eyes. When you ask, he hesitates, glancing at the doorway. Hemp, he whispers, not as secret but as habit. Centuries of modest invention hiding behind understatement. In medieval Europe, cannabis never fully vanished, it just learned to wear a disguise. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering. Monastic herbals from the 19th–13th centuries list hemp as cannabis sativa or cannabis among standard garden plants, primarily for rope, linen, and salves. Translators of Latin texts later found recipes for poultices made from ground hemp seeds to reduce swelling or treat arthritis. Historians still argue whether the monks occasionally partook of psychoactive varieties or simply cultivated industrial hemp. The records remain tantalizingly polite. The monk grinds seeds in a small mortar while murmuring a prayer. For pain and peace, he explains. You notice a bowl of beeswax melting nearby. He'll mix the oil into ointment for aching joints. Nothing scandalous about this plant here. It's medicine disguised as discipline. Yet the scent, faintly resinous and sweet, suggests that at least some healing happens on the level of mood, not muscle. Further down the hall, a young scribe copies the Physica of Hildegard von Bingen, the abbess who wrote extensively on natural remedies. Her notes on cannabis describe warmth and balance, a botanical handshake between body and spirit. Hildegard claimed that hemp oil lessens the pain in the head when used moderately. She also warned against overuse, approving once more that medieval wellness influencers were ahead of their time. Outside, bells ring for midday prayer. You follow your guide into the cloister garden, where sunlight dances on dew. Rows of plants glow emerald under archways. The air smells like morning bread and discipline. Still, something mischievous lingers in these corners, a whisper of experimentation, perhaps. Some say monks fermented everything they could. Hops, grapes, imaginations. Why not herbs that grew as tall as hope? A fringe tale passes through the centuries in certain Iberian monasteries. Traveling Moorish physicians introduced exotic mixtures including hashish, disguised as imported incense. Whether true or exaggerated, the story fits the era's rhythm, knowledge traded under quiet vows, secrets surviving by smell alone. Historians still argue whether these so-called healing fumes were medicinal inventions or forbidden entertainments smuggled inside religious duties. You wander past scriptoriums filled with quills scratching like patient insects. Ink stains fingers, fatigue stains eyes. Maybe the monks needed small relief between psalms. You imagine them inhaling faint traces of hemp smoke after burning scraps as mosquito repellent, feeling suddenly contemplative in ways theology conveniently allowed. There's humor in thinking holiness and haziness might occasionally overlap. Later, you climb to the roof walkway where swallows dart through blue air. From here, you see fields stretching out, a quilt of barley, flax, and yes, hemp. Bundles lie drying in the sun, destined to become robes, or paper for sermons condemning indulgence. The irony warms you like the noon light. Civilization keeps using the same plant to scold and to save. The monk beside you smiles. The Creator gave us herbs, he says gently, but men love to categorizing sacred, sinful, strong, weak. The plants never agreed to these divisions. You tell him that in the far future, people will still argue about this very leaf. His laughter echoes down the stone corridor, startling a dove into flight. At supper that night, communal bowls steam with stew. Someone mutters thanks, another hums softly. Conversation drifts from crops to weather, to rumors of crusaders returning from the east stuffed with strange stories about sweet-smelling smoke that makes warriors dream of paradise. The monks listen, intrigued yet wary. Different kind of fire, they call it, too unpredictable for cluster walls. Historians later trace those returning soldiers as one possible route for introducing hashish tales into Europe, legends of secret sects and mystic assassins. But that belongs to another campfire further east in time. Tonight's warmth remains humble candlelight, quiet company, the steady comfort of soup and smoke rising from hearthwood and herbs. You lean back against cold stone, tired but peaceful. The hall's dim light flickers over frescoes of saints framed by vines that look suspiciously leafy. Artistic coincidence, surely. Still, some painter out there knew what leaves made the best pattern. Outside, rain begins, a gentle tapping on rooftops, rhythmic and forgiving. The scent of damp hemp rope mingles with incense drifting from evening prayers. You realize history moves like this, storm soft, thorough, always circling back to feed the soil it once soaked. The monastery door closes for the night. Inside, somewhere behind barred windows and candle smoke, an herbalist keeps grinding seeds into promise. Those monasteries, unknowingly, are preserving the plant that emperors, priests, and kings will keep outlawing and rediscovering in cycles. Hemp will survive, be practicality always outstubborns piety. Sleep rises easy here. Your last thought before drifting, the night hums with quiet rebellion, hidden under the chant. Proof that even in centuries sworn to silence, the old smoke never really stopped breathing. The chanting you heard in the monastery fades, replaced by the rustle of palm leaves and the soft burble of a courtyard fountain. You find yourself in the heart of medieval Baghdad, sometime around the 10th century, when knowledge itself seems to travel faster than caravans. The air is sweet with saffron, smoke, and ink. The whole city hums like a living library. Somewhere among scholars arguing about astronomy, surgeons dissecting forgotten scrolls, and poets testing the edge of rhyme, another kind of curiosity smolders quietly, the hazy, seductive world of hashish. You follow laughter down an alley, where oil lamps paint gold halos over sandstone walls. Behind a door draped with embroidered fabric, a garden hides, clusters of fig trees, cushions scattered along marble benches, a faint trickle of oud music from a corner. It smells wonderful in here, cardamom, rosewater, perhaps a little mischief. A storyteller sits cross-legged before a bowl of glowing coals. Beside him, a small copper tray holds lumps of dark greenish resin. He grins when he sees you. "Guest from nowhere?" he says. "Come taste paradise." He crumbles a piece into the fire, sending up a lazy curl of smoke. You breathe it in. It's rich, honeyed, not quite like the simple hemp fires of earlier centuries. The East perfected alchemy. Even recreation here wears a veil of scholarship. Mainstream history backs the scening. By the 11th century, written accounts throughout the Islamic world mention hashish, a concentrated resin derived from cannabis. The word itself appears in medical compendiums and moral treatises alike. Some physicians, like the renowned Avicenna, cataloged the plant's properties for treating pain or digestion. Others condemned its excesses as mind-clouding vice. Historians still argue whether early Islamic scholars truly differentiated therapeutic uses from the social gatherings that would later define hashish culture. The storyteller whispers a verse. Smoke teaches patience, laughter reveals the heart. Applause ripples softly through the gardens. Patrons sip sherbet from glass cups glowing with pomegranate color. Someone strums a lute. The evening doesn't feel rebellious. It feels like waiting, a waiting for visions, poetry, or simply a good story. You settle onto a cushion as the storyteller begins reciting from his latest tales. It involves a dervish chasing a vapor-made genie through dream markets of copper and sound. Half the listeners giggle knowingly. They've been there, in the haze between logic and miracle. And in that suspended moment, you finally understand how hashish became more than indulgence. It became metaphor. A fringe tidbit surfaces from history's footnotes. Some Sufi mystics reportedly used small doses of hashish to aid meditative focus, claiming it opened the inner eye. Whether these accounts document real practice or later exaggerations, historians still argue whether early Sufism embraced or merely tolerated the herb. You imagine discussions stretching deep into the night, half theological, half philosophical, all under a canopy of smoke that respect doctrinal boundaries. As the stars rise, more guests arrive. Scholars, poets, even a sleepy-eyed physician wearing ink stains like medals. Everyone here seems to treat debate as dessert. One guest proclaims that true inspiration comes only from God, not from a plant. Another counters, if the Creator made the plant, are we not just visiting his thoughts? Everyone laughs, not offended but delighted. A server brings small cakes dusted with sugar. They taste sweet, dense, suspiciously mellowing. Within minutes, the conversation softens further, metaphors stretch like honey. You watch ideas expand into shimmering mosaics of logic and faith. This entire civilization, you realize, turns contradiction into art. Outside these refined circles, the same resin moves differently. In back alleys and among traveling laborers, hashish becomes evening comfort. Cheaper than wine, easier to hide from religious censors. A poets of the street invent songs about green sleep and the gentle forgetfulness of smoke. The moralists respond with pamphlets warning of indolence and sin. None of it works. Humanity, once introduced to relaxation, rarely sends it back. The paradox of the Islamic Golden Age glows above you intellect at its peaks. Laws tightening around pleasure, minds rebelling through metaphor. Hashish turns up everywhere in stories. The trickster's delight, the poet's muse, the mystic's crutch. You picture ancient copyists, while preserving scientific formulas, accidentally dropping crumbs of sweet resin onto manuscript margins. History seldom separates study from indulgence perfectly. By midnight, conversation drifts to memory and mortality. Someone murmurs that the smoke connects all ages of humankind, same breath, recycled through time. The storyteller nods, eyes half closed. Even prophets, he says softly, walked among herbs. A hush follows, then someone coughs politely, breaking the spell. Laughter bursts anew. Later, a walking home through moonlit streets, the aroma still clings to your clothes. Cats weave between arches. You pass a window where a scholar, too poor for servants, grinds herbs under lamplight. Perhaps medicine, perhaps imagination aid. This city never sleeps, it merely changes tone. In a few centuries, crusaders and travelers will carry tales of these smoke-filled gardens back to Europe, twisting them into legends of mysterious Eastern intoxication. But tonight, the air itself feels balanced between discipline and delight. The same plant that healed soldiers in Persia now helps philosophers chase metaphysical puzzles. It reinvents itself endlessly, as adaptable as thought. You pause at the Tigris River, water glinting smooth as black jade. A fisherman lights a small clay pipe, its glow mirrored in the current. Far away, a mosque's call to prayer begins, long southing, perfectly timed. Between flame and water, you glimpse humanity's contradictions like clear longing, holiness, curiosity. The smoke rises, caught by the desert breeze, and drifts westward, carrying its perfume toward medieval Europe, and unknowingly, another storm of misunderstanding waiting to ignite. You wake to the sound of chainmail rattling and foreign hymns echoing through narrow streets. The world has moved west again. Jerusalem, 12th century. Crusaders march past with banners bright against dust-brown walls. They look exhausted, half holy and half haunted. Beneath their armor, they carry more than scars and relics. Whispers of an intoxicating green paste from the east. Tonight, that whisper becomes legend. You follow a soldier limping into a shadowed tavern. He's sunburned, missing half an eyebrow, and carrying the air of someone who's seen too much wonder. When you sit across from him, he waves a chunk of bread for emphasis. You won't believe what the infidels do. He begins, eyes gleaming. Smoke that makes pain vanish and courage appear. He leans forward, lowering his voice. They call it hashish, mainstream factum by the early 1200s. European travelers returning from the Crusades brought stories about Islamic sects using hashish ritually, especially those surrounding the Nizari Ismailists, a Shia group at the fortress of Alamut. From those tales was born one of history's most infamous legends, the Assassins. These secret warriors, according to frightened chroniclers, were indoctrinated with visions of paradise induced by hashish before carrying out political killings. Whether true, wildly exaggerated, or entirely fabricated propaganda, historians still argue whether hashish truly played a role or merely served as metaphor for fanatic devotion. The soldier's friend slams his cup down. "I saw their garden," he swears. "Rivers of milk and wine, girls with eyes like moons." And afterwards, mad obedience. The others crowd closer. You suppress a smile. Exaggeration has been humanity's oldest side effect. Somewhere, and a chronicler is already sharpening his quill, ready to turn tavern gossip into holy warning. In truth, the assassins were far less mystical, more political, a disciplined sect navigating survival between empires. Whether they used cannabis at all is uncertain, but the word hashin, possibly insult meaning, hashish users, will soon morph in European tongues into assassin. In one semantic twist, a plant's name becomes synonymous with murder, hardly the branding Hemp deserved. You step out into the cooler night. Torches flicker over market stalls. Traders from Damascus tarot, Venice haggle in a dozen dialects. Someone wafts incense from a brass censer. The scent feels suspiciously familiar. Behind the fragrance hums tension, cross-cultural fascination made nervous by misunderstanding. A fringe tidbit from later historians suggests that some returning crusaders smuggled small amounts of hashish home, intrigued rather than horrified. Whether to relieve injury or curiosity, they became the first unwitting ambassadors of Middle Eastern cannabis culture to Europe. Yet back home, church authorities, already allergic to moral ambiguity, classified these substances among sorceries of the East. The plant's reputation now teetered between medicine and menace. You wander deeper into the city toward a dim courtyard where Eastern merchants trade privately. One invites you closer to a lantern's glow. He unwraps a tiny clay jar of resin dark as molasses. "For the mind's quiet," he says softly. A Western monk beside him frowns but doesn't walk away. They talk of herbs as equals might discuss theology. Same direction, different prayers. At that moment, you realize how fragile knowledge can be. One culture's comfort herb becomes another's conspiracy fuel. Still, curiosity keeps smuggling truth across borders. Later, while soldiers snore in their tents, poets awake in scriptoria, turning fragments of rumor into lasting myth. They'll paint pictures of gardens filled with intoxicated killers, their loyalty sealed by smoke. Centuries later, European writers will still quote those stories as exotic facts. Historians still argue whether any of it describes reality or simply fear dressed in flowers. As dawn climbs over the city walls, minarets and cathedrals catch the same sunlight. You watch mists curl near the valley, smoke rising from cooking fires, incense, maybe something else. The overlapping scents feel like negotiating holiness, making room for heresy, healing hidden under rumor. History's fragrance never comes in one note. Just outside town, Crusader knights repair their armor while local workers weave ropes, of hemp, naturally, for tents and siege engines. No one calls that sacrilegious. The plant earns forgiveness easily when it's useful. You smile at the ironing cannabis condemned in councils, yet indispensable in combat. Even the catapult slings rely on its fibers. Humanity, as usual, wields virtue on one side and utility on the other. Evening approaches again. In a quiet tent, a field surgeon brews a rough infusion of herbs, hemp among them, to soothe the wounds. The smell is sharp but comforting. A wounded knight drinks, grimacing then relaxing as pain dulls. No visions, no paradise, just relief. Maybe that's miracle enough. The chroniclers won't bother recording this moment of calm. They prefer the scandal of assassins and ecstasy. Yet you can't help noticing how all versions, the sensational and the simple, carry the same threads. Humans forever testing plans to bridge the unbearable gap between fear and peace. Night settles soft as ash. The city's torches blink out one by one, and the moon slides over stone walls like a silver hand. In the silence, you imagine the many meanings drifting on the same breeze. Aroma from soldiers' camps, prayers from mosques, rumors destined for parchment. History keeps inhaling its contradictions, exhaling new myths. Tomorrow, when Renaissance thinkers reopen curiosity's door, the old stories will come rushing in again, minus the fear, plus the experiments. The hemp will trade its assassin cloak for a scholar's robe, and smoking will trade allegiance from mystics to poets. The Dark Ages, for this plant at least, are temporary, but tonight the desert hums quiet wind brushing tents, smoke curling into constellations. Humanity's strangest rumor drifts skyward, already on its way to becoming Renaissance inspiration. Morning spills gold across tiled roofs and narrow canals. The year feels lighter now, somewhere in the 15th century, and Europe is shaking off its medieval sleep. You walk along the wharves of Venice, where everything smells of salt, ink, and possibility. The Renaissance is stretching its limbs. Painters, astronomers, and dreamers all compete for a little sunshine. And fluttering between ship sails and parchment scrolls is the plant that quietly survived dark ages by pretending to be boring hemps. Venetian rope walks home with the sound of labor. Vast halls stretch for blocks, filled with coils of hemp fiber drying like thick blonde rivers. These cords will soon bind sails for galleys bound east, toward India, Africa, the New World. Mainstream fact: European seafaring literally relied on hemp. A single ship required kilometers of rope and canvas. Without hemp, no Columbus, no Magellan, no Renaissance expansion. History's exploration age begins not with compass or courage, but with a fibrous stalk that doesn't snap. You touch a bundle freshly calmed for spinning, feeling its rough steadfastness. Sailors swear it carries luck at sea. Priests bless it without realizing they're sanctifying ancient cannabis cousins. Everyone's too busy discovering continents to worry about botany. Inside the city's apothecaries, though, another thread of curiosity coils. A glass jars bearing Latin labels line the shelves. Cannabis sativa oleum cannabinum. Physicians experiment with tinctures imported from the East. Curious about this herb rumored to calm spasms and sadness alike. A bearded scholar in blue robes invites you to watch as he distills plant oil with wine spirit inside an alembic. The scent hitting the air is grassy and warm, like sunlight through linen. Medicine for melancholy, he says proudly, though whether he's quoting a medical text or flirting with poetry, you can't tell. Scholars devour translations of Arabic and Persian texts arriving from their southern trade routes. Avicenna, Galen, Dioscorides were born in Latin forms. Some include passing notes on the glue of the hemp plant, used for delight and ease. Historians still argue whether European readers understood they were reading about hashish or thought it metaphorical. Either way, ideas travel faster than caravans now, and the boundaries between science and sorcery blur like watercolor. A fringe discovery flickers among alchemists when burned. The resinous parts yield unusual fumes that alter mood. They record this clinically, as though describing weather. Yet you sense the shift. The same curiosity driving Da Vinci's flying machines also peers into the brazen world of consciousness. Someone even writes that the herb softens the labor of thought. Renaissance scholars just accidentally described relaxation. Step outside, and the city gleams with invention. Printing presses thump away, endless pages of human ambition. Guess what the first durable European paper was made from? Again, hemp. So much of human thought, literally pressed into hemp's fiber, philosophical treatises, low sonnets, celestial maps, all scribbled onto pulverized plant stalks. It's poetic, the same material once woven into ropes now carries mental voyages. One afternoon you follow a painter near Florence. His studio reeks of linseed, turpentine, and faintly of something else. Hemp oil used in his pigments. When he grinds it with color, it gives canvases that eternal glow everyone still visits museums to worship. He glances at you, chuckling nervously. A whiff of madness never art. You grin. He's right, historically speaking. Creativity and cannabis have been exchanging nods since campfire age. Across Europe, experiments multiply as fast as trade profits. Doctors and universities dissect not only bodies but also extracted plant oils, measuring effects, noting calm or confusion. None of them call it getting high, they call it research. But the line between those two has always been narrow. Historians still argue whether small circles of humanists used cannabis recreationally. A letter from an Italian noble hints at herbs that soften speech and brighten color. Was it metaphor for wine, or literal description of hemp's subtle effects? Scholars debate. You picture candlelit gatherings filled with laughter that's a little too slow, conversation that drifts toward cosmic questions. Basically, the world's first Renaissance chill sessions. In libraries, monks now train apprentices to make parchment and paper side by side. Hemp rag turns out smoother than animal skin and cheaper too. The plant conquers commerce through efficiency, not rebellion. Yet in dusty backrooms, mystics reclaim the spiritual dimension. Some whisper that inhaling certain fumes helps glimpse divine geometry more clearly. Whether through prayer or puff, the Renaissance remains obsessed with perspective. By the late 1400s, hemp fields climb north. France, Germany, the Baltic. A farmer's joke, it's the only crop that loves bad soil and worse weather. Some weave it into clothing stored enough to survive months at sea. Imagine that paradox, the same fiber dressing monks and pirates alike. And beyond the Atlantic, new colonies await ropes for ships, paper for maps, canvas for sails. Hemp will plant itself in the New World soon, another immigrant to the endless frontier. But that's still ahead. Tonight, the harbor glows with lanterns reflected in calm water. Workers offload trade chests filled with silk, spices, and, quietly, bags of pressed hashish resin tucked between cinnamon bundles. Officially, nobody notices. Unofficially, curiosity wins against. You lean on the pyre rail watching gulls wheel under moonlight. The world feels suddenly connected. Cultures trading not only objects but sensations, philosophies, smells. The age of discovery turns out to be an age of rediscovery, for this plant never left, it just changed costumes, moving from temple to workshop to shipyard and now to studio. A ship sails westward, sails creaking, hemp tightening against wind. Somewhere in its hold, a sailor dreams of strange lands and gentle smoke curling from a future not yet written. The Renaissance always pretends it's rational, but tonight, under the stars, you can feel the old magic still smoldering inside its science. Tomorrow you'll follow that ship to fledgling colonies where hemp will build a new empire's ropes before anyone even thinks of recreation again. But for now, watch the lanterns fade into sea fog and listen to them whisper how curiosity, not conquest, keeps history breathing. The air you breathe now tastes of salt and smoke, freshly turned soil, and the faint sweetness of chance. You've sailed west with the explorers, across what they still call the ocean sea, and stepped ashore in a new world of riverbanks and promise. Hemp grows here the way ambition does fast, sturdy everywhere the light touches. The settlers, exhausted and half-starved, look at the green stalks waving in wind and see not medicine or mysticism but pure survival. Rope, canvas, rigging, clothing, everything their fragile colonies need, depends on the plant. A mainstream historical fact for your half-dreaming brain. By the early 1600s, European powers, especially England and Spain, required their colonies to cultivate hemp for the empire's naval appetite. Revolutionary America would later inherit that obsession. Even the first drafts of its founding charters would rely on hemp paper. It's a quiet ironing freedom declarations written on stems of imperial conformity. You wander through a field outside Jamestown. Mud sucks at your boots. The humid air smells of crushed leaves and smate. A farmer ties bundles by the dozen, sighing. Couldn't rig a ship without her, he says. Can't eat her either. But she keeps us alive. The plant, patient as ever, bends under every use without complaint. Boats drift up rivers laden with stalks, mills clatter. Rope walks appear as long wooden scars across landscapes. Colonists mix practicality with superstition. They bless hemp fields during planting, thanking God for durability, hoping storms stay where they belong. Dried hemp seeds become porridge, oil lamps burn on pressed hemp oil, glowing faintly green. But even here, whispers arrive in taverns of another form of the plant, the eastern resin with its mood-softening bite. Ships from Africa and the Caribbean bring not only sugar and sorrow but unfamiliar herbs bundled in cloth. Sailors trade pouches among themselves, a saying it calms seasickness or loneliness. The same plant again, subtly changing uniform to match new climates of need. Historians still argue whether psychoactive cannabis took root in colonial America this early or only later through Caribbean channels. Some argue enslaved Africans familiar with ritual herbs reintroduced newer strains. The paper trail, if it ever existed, burned alongside countless injustices. Yet by scent alone, you can believe it. The wind carries faint sweetness from cooking fires where someone experiments with the plant beyond rope and rigs. You pass a printing shop in Williamsburg. Inside, an apprentice sets blocks of type while pages dry on racks above. The paper smells of hemp pulp and ambitions. Its revolutionary DNA, the ideology of freedom literally printed on plant fiber. A paradox takes root on. The same empire demanding endless fields of hemp will soon be challenged by minds whose manifestos rely on it. A fringe tidbit drifts through your memory. A George Washington's personal garden journals mention hemp cultivation at Mount Vernon. Not for smoke but rope and oil, yet modern interpretations keep joking about whether he inhaled accidentally. The myth endures because the idea is irresistible, that founding fathers, stressed by politics, might have enjoyed a stress relief common to laborers. Historians still argue, of course, preferring dryness to delight, even without intoxication. Hemp shapes colonies more than tobacco or cotton at first. Townships enforce quotas. Sailors' lives depend on endless coils of hemp rope that won't rot in salt spray. You visit a port warehouse, the air inside feels like breathing through a giant tea bag. Fibrous, dusty, puritanically useful. In one corner, a dockworker grins while patching sailcloth. This plant's the only worker never complains, he says, tugging the thread smooth. Night falls soft over the river. Fireflies drift above fields drilled in neat rows. You lie back on damp grass listening to cicadas hiss and thinking how pragmatic this chapter is. No temples, no philosophers, no mystics. Just people refusing to sink. Maybe that's heroism of another kind. Yet beneath their stoicism hums something older. Memory from the Nile, the Indus, the steppes. Generations ago, smoke linked human minds. Now the same plant anchors human hands. Empires measure progress by utility, not joy, but even utility can feel sacred when the stakes are survival. Somewhere inland, under candlelight, an amateur scientist scribbles on fibers, seeds, oils. He imagines cures and commerce. Soon industrial revolutions will follow. Steam, machines, factories spooling hemp faster than any hand ever could. But that mechanical speed will also thin its dignity. Rope begins to look ordinary when made by gears instead of sweat. Still, for now, the fields whisper with pride, flexing against the Atlantic wind. A ship's bell rings from the harbor. You can almost hear it echo across centuries, a metallic heartbeat connecting continents. Every clang translates to the same messaging: we owe the ocean to hemp. Tomorrow, your story floats forward again, to poets in velvet jackets spooning exotic hash paste in 19th century Paris, where reason collapses into art. The plant will shed its farmer's apron and slip into silk gloves, inspiring painters instead of sailors. But before that glamour, watch this moonlight stretch over colonial soil and think of the paradox: civilization's most adaptable crops, quietly stitching survival and rebellion under the same stars. The night warms, insects drone, and the scent of crushed fiber clings gently to your clothes. Sleep comes easily in places built on endurance. The damp smell of cobblestones and espresso clings to the air. When you open your eyes, the century has changed again, Paris 1840s, and the noise around you is completely different. Carriages clatter, poets argue in cafes, and somewhere a violin wails for attention. Gone are the hemp fields and colonial ropes. Here, the plant has reinvented itself indoors. Powdered in velvet and whispered in poultry, cannabis has entered its bohemian phase. You follow the scent of roasted chestnuts into a tall stone building along the scene. Inside sits the Club des Hashishans, the legendary Hashish Club, a gathering place for artists who believe reality could use a creative adjustment. The room sells faintly of candle wax and something darker, honeyed. A man in a green velvet jacket greets you warmly. You're late, he teases. But the hashish is patient. You find yourself among 19th century royalty of imagination: Baudelaire, Gautier, Delacroix, perhaps even Alexander Dumas, all here to experiment with a mysterious paste imported from the East. A servant brings tiny porcelain dishes of sticky emerald substance called dawamesk, made from cannabis resin mixed with sugar, pistachio, and exotic spices. It looks almost innocent, like a dessert that lost its manners. You taste less than a spoonful, it dissolves into fire and rose petals. The room softens, sounds elongate. As the seconds unspool, laughter seems to travel in visible waves. Mainstream historical facts. These Parisian salons of the 1840s and 50s really existed, chronicled especially by writers such as Théophile Gautier and Charles Baudelaire. Their accounts described hashish not as vice, but as doorway, to inspiration, to madness, to flights of imagery that defied logic. Historians still argue whether their elaborate ecstasies were exaggerated for literary drama or honest reports from true experiments in perception. Baudelaire declares, half serious, the poet must create intoxication without poison. Gautier replies, then why refuse assistance? Everyone laughs before lapsing into 20 minutes of profound silence. You watch candlelight tremble across Delacroix's sketchbook. Every line glows conspiratorial. This is how myths of genius are made, not by thunderbolts, but by dinner dates that accidentally reinvent self-awareness. The fringe tidbit you overhear later: medical journals of the time, inspired by these artistic forays, begin testing cannabis tinctures as anesthesia substitutes and pain relievers. French physician Jacques-Joseph Moreau publishes Du hashish et de l'aliénation mentale in 1845, arguing that hashish reveals the architecture of madness. He calls effects laboratory of the mind. Whether science believed him or simply envied his bravery, the idea sticks. For a shimmering decade, a cannabis shifts from folk remedy to neurological key. You wander out onto the foggy quay sometime past midnight. Paris is still wide awake. Street lamps turn steam into hellos. Somewhere, a poet throws up metaphors faster than his notebook can catch. Perhaps Europe needed escape after the Iron Age of rationalism, something illogical, fragrant, and forgiving. At the same time, across the ocean, British officers in India send home reports about locals using ganja and charas. Some write it as curiosity, others as offense. By the 1860s, the British Empire will commission an entire indie hemp drugs report, a bureaucratic attempt to quantify human euphoria. Historians still argue whether its findings, generally mild in judgment, were ignored or censored when Prohibition fever later swept the West. Back in Paris, though, nobody's ready for Prohibition yet. The city survives on contradictioning everything forbidden sells better at twilight. Inside smoky cafes, students and dowagers alike exchange ideas about dreams, mortality, and whether clouds have opinions. Hashish becomes shorthand for modern ennui, the acceptable madness of civilizations too educated to pray and too restless to sleep. You pass a newsstand where caricaturists lampoon the artists as green pudding dreamers, arguably accurate. Yet the ridicule only romanticizes them more. Every generation needs eccentric prophets to remind the sober majority what imagination tastes like. A few painters drag you to the scene at dawn. They describe color, language, motion like taste. One dips his brush in river water mixed with a crumb of hashish paste, murmuring that he's dissolving perspective. You're too sleepy to stop him. Besides, art survived worse experiments. The sunrise melts into watercolor around you, pink smothering grays, wind soft as wool. Whether hashish truly enhances vision or simply unlocks permission to wonder, you can't tell. Either explanation suits humanity's need for myth. From somewhere behind, Baudelaire's voice floats faintly. A man's longing for infinity cannot be served by geometry alone. You turn and find him scribbling furiously, pupils wide as moons. This intoxication will later become verses about paradise found and lost, the duality of beauty and despair, art and anxiety perfectly blended. Eventually, fashion changes, empires tighten moral belts again. Doctors replace poetic ecstasy with laboratory caution. By century's end, the plant's reputation divides once more. Apothecary shelves label it respectable, newspapers brand it dangerous. But for a few decades in this candlelit interlude, Cannabis managed to flirt with genius openly. You head back toward your lodging through quiet alleys. Dawn wind cuts the sweetness from your lungs. Over rooftops, chimney smoke joins fog, another kind of communal haze binding city to dream. Maybe that's the truest high of all, the collective willingness to imagine differently, just long enough to paint the world new. Tomorrow, the story shifts to sterner times again, to Victorian morals, colonial medicine bottled and rationed, an empire both fascinated and scandalized by its own discoveries. For tonight, though, linger in this luminous afterglow where reality, for once, let imagination drive. You blink, and the velvet haze of Paris dissolves into polished mahogany and ticking clocks. The year is now somewhere in the late 1800s, when gas lamps glow through London fog and progress prides itself on wearing a stiff collar. The smell of coal fills everything, including curiosity. You're surrounded by Victorian order corsets, carriages, and a quiet panic about pleasure. In a small pharmacy on Fleet Street, behind glass jars filled with improbable ingredients, neat shelves display green-tinted bottles labeled Cannabis Indica Tinct. Each one carries solemn instructions: 5 drops for insomnia, 10 for hysteria. Lees with prudence. A sign warns not to administer to children. The chemist adjusts his spectacles, muttering, "This is India's gift to nerves beyond saving." A mainstream historical fact to ground the dream: by the mid-19th century, Western medicine embraced cannabis extracts imported from colonial India. Doctors prescribed them for migraines, convulsions, menstrual cramps, and melancholia. Queen Victoria's own physician, Sir J. Russell Reynolds, praised it in medical journals as one of the most valuable medicines we possess. Historians still argue whether the doses ever truly matched their flowery endorsements, or if empire's fascination exaggerated both danger and delight. You wander through the fog-damp streets, noticing signs of paradox everywhere. In respectable drawing rooms, ladies sip tea scented faintly with Indian hemp elixir, a quiet way of saying they slept better. Down in dockside pubs, the sailors buy black market resin by candlelight, the same plant filtered through fear instead of fashion. Social class changes everything except chemistry. In the parlor of a writer's club, conversation drifts toward oriental excess. Hashish has become an exotic metaphor, the phantom pleasure of the mysterious East. Oscar Wilde plays along, quipping, "It's not intoxication they fear, my dear, but imagination out of their control." You laugh quietly, because you know how right he'll be. Victorian newspapers oscillate between fascination and dread. One edition praises cannabis tinctures for saving children from seizures. The next warns of colonies, stupefied by vile indulgence. The empire loves moral symmetry, what heals must also corrupt. Behind the rhetoric echo anxieties about empire itself, its reach too wide, its imports too effective at altering minds. A fringe historical curiosity in 1894. Britain's massive Indian Hemp Drugs Commission conducted painstaking research on cannabis used throughout India. After interviewing thousands, farmers, priests, physicians, they concluded its dangers were largely exaggerated. The report's tone was surprisingly chilled for its era, but policymakers preferred alarm to nuance. Historians still argue whether the findings were shelved because they contradicted popular fear or because public morality was already addicted to outrage. You pass a bookshop window advertising the latest scientific wonders of the Orient. Inside, someone reads aloud a traveler's tale describing Sufi mystics communing via Kara's smoke that sings. The audience murmurs both envy and disapproval. Colonialism consumes cultures as entertainment. Even the sacred fumes become parlor anecdotes. Meanwhile, doctors keep distilling. In Edinburgh, a pharmacist named W.B. O'Shaughnessy refines tinctures so precisely they could lull a horse. His papers formalize scientific respectability. Soon American pharmacopoeias include cannabis beside quinine and morphine. The plant becomes middle class again, no rebellion, just prescription. Ironically, that dull stability is what will doom it later, when new synthetic drugs promise cleaner control, leaving old herbal shadows behind. You step into a London hospital ward. Patients lie beneath gaslight, everything echoing disinfectant and sighs. A nurse wraps a child's arm, whispering comfort. The physician adds a single drop of brown tincture to water. No ritual, no laughter, just medicine at work. You realize how far humanity has traveled from tents and temples. Same chemistry, stripped of ceremony. Outside, lamplighters move like ghosts through drizzle. You trail one down an alley. He hums a shanty learned in India, humming about home while coaxing flame from pole to pole. Smoke and empire unify briefly in his arc of light. Then he vanishes into fog, leaving only the scent of oil and distance. Back in elegant parlors, piano music swells. The guests discuss Charles Darwin, seances, and the power of will. Someone passes you a cordial. Gentle motors of imagination. Your host says, the flavor carries faint spice. Someone added drops of that same tincture. Conversation brightens, arguments soften. The Victorians discovered microdosing long before Silicon Valley had marketing for it. Yet beneath the refinement whispers unease. Temperance movements gather momentum, preaching purity as progress. Anything altering the mind becomes suspect. As the century ends, governments worldwide begin cataloguing dangerous substances, quietly preparing prohibitions that will reshuffle chemistry's reputation. Cannabis, a mild compared to opium or cocaine, will nonetheless be lumped together for bureaucratic convenience, a fate sealed more by fear than fact. Standing at Waterloo Bridge, you watch the teams glitter under gaslight, steamships slide past, their rigging still woven from hemp. The empire literally tied together by the planet now moralizes about. You picture the irony, a substance industrially indispensable, but emotionally unforgivable. Humanity, still unable to separate comfort from guilt. You exhale into the fog, the river swallowing the sound. Victorian London fades behind you, its contradictions intact. Science nurturing stigma in the same heartbeat. Ahead lies a new century impatient for speed, jazz, rebellion, and laws drawn in ink darker than morality deserves. As the first electric bulbs blink to life across the skyline, history exhales again. The gentle medicinal leaf will soon become a headline villain. Proof that enlightenment is never a straight line, but a spiral of forgetting and rediscovery. You rub the fog of coal dust from your coat sleeves, and when your eyes adjust, it's no longer Top Hat London, but neon-trimmed jazz clubs in 1920s New Orleans. The air is thick, smoke, brass perfume, fried shrimp, and something softly sweet that the police would rather not notice. The decade hums with restlessness. Everything crackles in syncopation. Cannabis, once bottled for medicine, has stepped out of the pharmacy and onto the bandstand. You push open a club door. The room vibrates like a heartbeat. Trumpets gleam beneath stage lights, piano keys hammer joy, and a saxophone crowns small rebellions between notes. In the corner, a few musicians lean over a cigarette that smells faintly herbal, laughing between solos. A trumpet player with eyes like midnight grins at you. We call it muggles. Friend? Makes the notes dance longer. Mainstream historical facting by the 1920s. Cannabis, then called marijuana or reefer, had rooted itself in North American nightlife, especially within jazz culture. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet spoke of it openly as a creative and calming aid. Its use was common enough to spawn entire songs about it. Historians still argue whether the plant truly sharpened improvisation or simply eased stage tension. But every musician you talk to swears the rhythm feels friendlier. You take a seat amid smoke, feeling the floorboards pulse under your feet. Conversations weave through slang refer gauge tea. Outside, prohibition bans alcohol. Inside, that ban just changes the flavor of rebellion. A sax player leans close, whispering, "You can jail gin, but you can't jail the wind." Then he exhales a perfect smoke ring shaped like a treble clef. The culture of cannabis has switched languages again, from Latin prescription to coded poetry. The plant becomes soundtrack rather than sacrament. A fringe tidbitting. In Harlem and New Orleans, tea pads pop up. Discreet apartments where people gather to listen, laugh, and share smoke without judgment. Some charge a small fee. Others just ask for good stories. Officially illegal. Not yet, morally suspect. Only to those who can't dance. As the night wears on, rhythm slides into trance. The drummer loses count purposefully, bending time so the audience has to trust instinct. You hear, a century away, the echo of ancient Scythian drums, temple chants, Persian flutes, all reborn as jazz. Maybe this is how the plant always manifests, not as vice, but tempo. You step outside between sets. The alley buzzes with pecan lights and muffled radios. Two women in feathered headbands share laughter that sparkles louder than the moonlight. One calls it her happy cigarette. Another quotes a line from a Harlem poet who calls smoke the small escape that fits between heartbeats. The city's heartbeat answers with horns from the river. Yet for every swirl of optimism, another wave of paranoia brews. Headlines begin painting marijuana madness. Journalists spicing fear with racism, describing jazz clubs as dens of corruption. New bureaucracies form to manage morals. In Washington, a man named Harry Anslinger rehearses speeches about degenerate weed. His campaign, you know too well, will rewrite global perception for decades. Historians still argue whether his crusade sprang from real concern or political convenience, but the results will be devastatingly efficient. Back inside, the band dedicates its final set to Mr. Armstrong's lungs. The laughter covers a tremor of urgency. Everyone senses the world tightening again. You sip something that's definitely not tea, watching smoke drift through lamplight. Appreciation and fear always seem to share breathing space. Toward the club's back wall, an artist sketches quick portraits of the musicians, using burnt hemp wick as charcoal. Perfect medium, she says, smudging lines with her fingertips. Soft, forgiving. You grin thinking the description fits more than the pencil. As dawn glows pale blue over the Mississippi, streetcars clatter past shuttered bars. You walk along Canal Street, the smell of fried dough battles with yesterday's perfume. Somewhere behind you, another club door swings open, laughter spilling out, chased by music as alive as pulse. American dreams rarely sleep, they just change tempo. Jazz carries cannabis out of secrecy for good. Through traveling bands and records, it spreads to Chicago, Kansas City, New York, Los Angeles, anywhere sound hungers for risk. The plant becomes not medical or ritual but cultural identity and freedom in smoke form. The irony is delicious. Government agents think they're fighting intoxication, the players know they're protecting creativity. A fringe footnote in 1930, the first recorded use of the phrase, "reefer man," appears in popular song, immortalizing slang long before legislation. Meanwhile, new immigrant communities from Mexico bring their own cannabis traditions north, blending with Black American artistry. Cultures intermingle the way chords do. Unexpectedly perfect, you linger at the riverside watching morning fishermen cast nets. Their ropes, likely, are still hemp. The circle tightens, industrial, medicinal, cultural, all threads woven from one stubborn plant. Each era thinks it discovered it. None realize they're just another chapter. As the sun climbs, the world picks up speeding flappers, films, big bands, the approach of depression and war. The easy laughter of jazz will soon face moral outrage and laws drafted in marble offices. But tonight's echo still rings inside you. The trumpets wail, the shared inhale, the quiet solidarity of people chasing rhythm rather than reason. You breathe out slowly. The smoke drifts downriver toward unseen horizons, maybe toward the screens of old cinemas, maybe into million hearts still chasing freedom disguised as melody. Tomorrow's story will be darker. Propaganda reels, sensational films, fear louder than truth. But for a few fading minutes, the morning hums like a trumpet note that refuses to end. The trumpets fade into static. Suddenly you're inside a theater, 1936, air thick with cigarette haze and moral panic. A black and white film flickers on the silver screen, promising a lesson every parent must see. On the poster, wide eyes and outlined smoke scream in horror. The title hits you in clanging capitals, Reefer Madness. The laughter of last night's jazz evaporates like it was never born. The movie unfolds with melodramatic precision. High school students, once innocent, take a single puff and spiral into murder, madness, jazz ironically, and doom. Every frame glares with righteous exaggeration. The audience gasps and whispers. You nurse the sudden suspicion that nobody here has actually seen a cannabis leaf in real life. Mainstream facting, Reefer Madness, was part of a full-scale propaganda wave in the 1930s, orchestrated largely by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Narcotics under Commissioner Harry Anslinger. His campaign linked cannabis to everything repellent to middle-class America. Immorality, jazz, race mixing, and crime. Newspapers echoed his claims without evidence. Historians still argue whether those crusades were truly moral, racially motivated, or bureaucratic maneuvers to justify a new agency's budget. Whatever the origin, the result was a social bonfire of misinformation. You step outside the theater. The street buzzes with talk. Mothers clutching handbags, fathers swearing to inspect their children's bedrooms for the evil weed. Behind them, a pharmacy shelves quietly empty as medical cannabis loses approval one regulation at a time. Within 2 years, the 1937 Marijuana Act effectively criminalizes the plant nationwide. Overnight, physicians require federal stamps to prescribe what yesterday was an accepted treatment. Few bother. Fear rewrites commerce faster than science can protest. Across the tracks, a jazz musician rolls his last joint under a street lamp, whispering, "Guess they outlawed the only thing that kept us kind." He smiles sadly, exhales, and fades into the night. The United States embraces Prohibition Day Vo, another attempt to make morality enforceable by paperwork. A fringe tidbit emerges from the archives. Anslinger's files contained hundreds of lurid case studies, stories of reefer-driven crimes, later proven false or exaggerated. Historians still argue whether he personally fabricated them or merely curated lies the public already wanted. Either way, his narrative stuck so hard that decades of policy grew from those roots like weeds made of ink. Back in Hollywood, the same studios that once flirted with jazz culture now churn out anti-drug shorts. Actors pantomime derangement for the camera, eyes rolling dramatically. You smirk? Some of these scenes accidentally invent modern camp comedy, but the laughter fades when you remember the consequences: arrests skyrocketing, lives derailed, science silenced by cinema. You wander past newspaper boys shouting headlines, "New menace to youth," each exclamation mark selling better than truth. You meanwhile, hemp industries themselves suffer collateral damage. Competing cotton and timber magnates find the scare campaign convenient. Hemp fibers decline clears markets for their own products. The plant becomes guilty by association, strangled by capitalism camouflaged as conscience. In smoky government offices, committees debate numbers that don't exist. One senator mutters something about racial degeneracy. Another clacks his pen like a metronome for hysteria. No one mentions that soldiers in both world wars quietly used hemp rope for parachutes and uniforms. Facts are slow, outrage marches in perfect time. By 1941, public paranoia feels industrialized. Films, pamphlets, even church sermons denounce a plant described as foreign poison. A schoolteacher confiscates a student's illustrated Bible because its pressed leaves resemble something suspicious. Children learn their first lessons in anxiety. And yet, underground jazz carries on, now tinged with defiance. Where musicians drop secret cues into songs, tiny riffs mocking the uniform chorus of fear. There's humor and rebellion on one tune. If You're a Viper celebrates dreamsticks, with sly joy sneaking freedom past censors. Culture always finds rhythm and resistance. Late one evening, you stroll along a quiet boulevard. Poster in a pharmacy window still advertises an obsolete tincture. Cannabis indica for pain relief. Someone tried to scratch out the word with pen, but the ghost letters remain. The whole century suddenly feels like that window. Scratched, but not erased. Then war drums begin overseas, and propaganda redirects its aim. As World War II accelerates, government memos quietly reverse course. The same officials who outlawed hemp now launch Hemp for Victory campaigns, begging farmers to grow it again for rope, uniforms, and parachute webbing. It's absurdly bureaucratic magic. A field in one decade becomes a patriot crop the next. Historians still argue whether wartime hemp revival truly rehabilitated the plant's reputation or deepened the irony that fuels activism later. What's certain is that the pattern of panic repeating pragmatism becomes history's favorite loop. Standing under a flickering neon sign, you realize how much damage one decade of fear inflicted. Generations will inherit that mything that smoke equals sin, music equals contagion, and pleasure equals decay. The film reel spins endlessly, looping moral panic for whoever next forgets to fact-check. You search the dark street for the faint glow of resistance, maybe in a melody, a whispered story, a stubborn plant pushing through sidewalk cracks. There it is, small but bright. The smoke thins, the projector stops rattling, and somewhere the night exhales, preparing for another plot twist where survival once again smells faintly green. The film reel melts into sepia, and before you can blink, it's 1942. The world has traded jazz clubs for uniforms, nightclub smoke for battlefield haze. You stand in a barn somewhere in the American Midwest, watching a group of farmers stare down a brand new government poster. In bold type, it declares, "Hemp for Victory." Beneath it, cartoon soldiers swing on ropes and parachute lines, smiling like morality was never an issue. The hypocrisy is almost endearing. After years of vilifying the same plant, officials now pled for farmers to grow it again, because synthetic fibers can't keep up with the war. The U.S. government even produces a short propaganda film. urging citizens to cultivate hemp for the war effort. You can almost hear the bureaucratic cough behind that reversal. Forget everything we said last decade. The voiceover implies. The nation needs cordage, not conscience. Mainstream historical fact between 1942 and 1945. The Department of Agriculture distributed hemp seeds across the Midwest and Kentucky, encouraging mass cultivation to supply rope, canvas, and naval rigging. Over 300,000 acres were planted. When the war ended, those same farmers were told to destroy their crops. Historians still argue whether the whiplash policy was cynical expedience or genuine oversight, but the message was clear. Cannabis could be saint or sinner, depending on who needed rope that year. You walk through rows of tall hemp, leaves glittering under early sun. Workers scythe rhythmically, stacking bundles that smell like dry paper and oil. Their laughter carries over tractors' drone. No one mentions illegality here. The plant has diplomatic immunity again. Young boys tie bales and joke that keeps the ships together and the girls in stockings. Maybe true. Hemp fibers even stabilized parachutes, dropping supplies across oceans. At a nearby station, crates labeled hemp fiber, U.S. Navy approved, disappear into boxcars. Military secrecy cloaks irony well. No one publicly admits that weapon production and rope making depend on the same species vilified as weed. Across the Atlantic, the story echoes differently. Soviet scientists study hemp genetics to improve yield. Japanese troops burn fields in occupied China to starve resistance industries of fibers. Empires everywhere rediscover hemp's utility even as propaganda back home insists marijuana ruins nations. Global hypocrisy blooms like camouflage. You lean against a fence post, letting the cicadas hum. A field hand smokes a hand-rolled cigarette that definitely isn't tobacco. He shrugs. After a day with this stuff, little smoke don't hurt nobody. You smile. Survival and rebellion often share the same scent. When the war ends in 1945, the machine stops abruptly. The hemp for victory. Film vanishes from archives, classified and forgotten for decades. Farmers receive polite letters instructing them to plant corn instead. Those remaining stalks become blanket evidence overnight. Government memory, apparently. You enjoy selective amnesia. In cities, the returning soldiers find another campaign waiting. Weed, once patriotic, returns to its role as social villain. Law enforcement emerges from war with surplus discipline and needs new targets. Jazz clubs and immigrant neighborhoods are convenient ones. The 1950s soon brand cannabis as Communist Alley, part of the Red Scare's paranoia buffet. The plant's resuming, from healer to heretic to hero and back to heretic again. A fringe tidbit flickers from wartime notes. A President Roosevelt's naval engineers tested hemp fibers against synthetic nylon and found hemp still superior for elasticity in salt water. Historians still argue whether that fact influenced post-war manufacturers or simply embarrassed them into silence because nylon had better lobbyists. Economics, not chemistry, ultimately defeats hemp. You wander to a small bridge crossing a creek, water glinting dull silver. Discarded hemp ropes hang like ghosts from wooden rails. Each sway feels like irony's pendulum, wartime necessity turned back to peacetime taboo. Yet life persists. New seeds hide under soil, unapologetic. Around you, the early stirrings of counterculture are faint but audible. Jess brings stories from Asia, where herbal highs mingle with jazz memories and displacement. Beat poets, still children, will inherit those whispers. They'll turn hemp's practical legacy into metaphoric freedom against conformity. For now, though the country wants neatness. Starched uniforms, brand new suburbs trimmed like lawns. The smell of hemp feels rustic, outdated, too earthy for chrome dreams. Pharmaceutical chemistry, all sparkle and precision, overtakes old herb lore. Modernity rarely tolerates nostalgia unless it sells. You sit by the creek as dusk settles, watching dragonflies arc over the forgotten crop. The silence hums with a strange humor of a plant legally resurrected, then buried again before the press could finish spelling its name. It survived emperors, priests, poets, and now politicians. You can't help cheering for such persistence. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackles with the Andrews sisters harmonizing about coming home. The catchy optimism barely hides fatigue. The war saved democracy but cost curiosity. Nations will need another 50 years to unlearn their contradictions. You reach down, pluck a stray hemp leaf, and crumble it between your fingers. It smells of rope and possibility. See you again? You whisper, knowing it's not hope but certainty. Because history, like hemp, always finds a way to sprout through the cracks. Tomorrow, you'll climb into the smoky cars of the 1950s, the beat puts, trains, and roadside diners where cannabis becomes symbol instead of crop. But tonight, you leave the war behind, the fading echo of patriotic irony still clinging to your clothes like dust and truth. Long trains rumble through the nights, their windows flickering like restless thoughts. You're not in uniform now. You're in a decade that wants none of that. The 1950s roll beneath your feet, full of chrome, conformity, and coffee strong enough to disguise insomnia. Yet somewhere between suburban picket fences and jazz basements, another generation starts to breathe differently. The beat poets call it kicks. You ride one of those trains west with them, through deserts and diner towns. Smoke curls above snapping fingers as someone reads, voice half chant, half confession, words tumble like road dust. Heroic, Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti. Burn. Mad angels, someone whispers. They speak of motion as prayer, rebellion as rhythm. The herb moves easily among them, a green punctuation mark between lines of revelation. Mainstream historical fact in by mid-century. A cannabis use spread through bohemian enclaves as quietly as jazz once had. Greenwich Village, North Beach, San Francisco. Its criminalization had driven it underground, but underground in this decade meant fashionable. Historians still argue whether the beat's fondness for cannabis was aesthetic rebellion or simply proximity. Either way, the plant became muse and mirror for their pudic insomnia. In smoky apartments above bookstores, poets pass joints as punctuations. The scene smells of ink and burnt toast. Someone mutters, "The law tells you what not to feel. The weed shows you how ridiculous that is." You exhale, imagining the sigh looping through every repressed suburb in America. Outside, the mainstream lives in black and white tidy families, televised morality, refrigerators as status symbols, but friction hums beneath the wallpaper. War veterans question authority, young writers question purpose. Cannabis floats like a secret handshake, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, subversive enough to feel like truth. On a sidewalk cafe in San Francisco, a guitarist quotes Whitman between chords. His audience of philosophers, painters, and baristas stares dreamily through the smoke. "We inhale each other's optimism," he says, "and call it art." Nobody corrects him. Behind the counter, a waitress in cat-eye glasses rolls her eyes affectionately. "You boys think too much." She's right, of course. But thinking too much is the beat brand. Post-war burnout turned into style. And the plant they pass around amplifies that style, softens cynicism, makes language elastic again after a decade of moral cement. A fringe tidbit in 1957, the U.S. Customs Service staged the publicized beatnik drug raid in San Francisco's North Beach, arresting small-time poets and musicians for possession. The press delighted in the spectacle. Yet instead of extinguishing the scene, it romanticized it further. Historians still argue whether those raids helped create the enduring, cool outlaw archetype. You wander through City Lights bookstore, stacks leaning like rebellious ideas. Allen Ginsberg's voice echoes from a recorded reading. "Moloch, whose mind is pure machinery!" The cry against industrial conformity. The audience sighs knowingly. Half of them are high enough to feel the words physically. The iron in cannabis, centuries old, now fuels poetry about the future. Later, you stumble into a basement club. Upright bass thrums like steady heartbeat, drummers chase it, catching smoke in cymbal edges. Between sets, someone quotes Lao Tzu. Someone else starts painting on the floor. You think of Scythian tents and Persian gardens. The same rhythm, recycled for modern loneliness. Then the law knocks again. A police siren wails outside. Everyone tenses, the drummer mutters, "Don't dump the sticks." The raid passes by, maybe chasing teenagers instead. The tension lingers, though, like static in the air. Fear's the only constant that never gets outlawed. Back on the cross-country train, beat travelers press their faces to dirty windows. America unrolls like an unfinished poem. Neon dust, motel signs, infinite possibilities. Someone sketches spirals in a notebook, labeling them maps of consciousness. Someone else hums a jazz tune without realizing it's decades old. Cannabis glows gently between them, bridging silence and conversation, exactly as it did in campfires and temples long before they were born. Yet cultural winds are shifting fast. Television's perfect suburban families can't contain what's brewing beneath them. The younger siblings of these poets will soon swap Barretts for flowers, transform smoke into protest, and demand not just art but change. Momentum hums beneath the wheels. The counterculture gathering volume like a storm. A fringe rumor circulates. Government psychologists quietly study cannabis again, comparing it to alcohol for soldier rehabilitation programs. Results seem mild, even beneficial. Reports get filed, ignored. Historians still argue whether data was buried intentionally or merely misfiled under disinterest. Either way, truth remains underground with the poets. You rest your head against the train window. Towns flash by like blips in memory. The world feels between generations, older than conformity, younger than revolutions. Outside, fields roll into darkness, and for a moment you imagine ancient hemp growing there invisibly, roots stretching beneath rest stops and highways, patient for rediscovery. In the dining car, a college smokes cautiously by the open door, humming Howl under his breath. He passes you the joint and adds, they say paradise is a state of mind. I think it's just a well-timed exhale. You smile. Wisdom rarely gets clearer than that. By the time dawn blushes over the Rockies, the beats fade into myth. Half saints, half sinners, carrying their green muse westward. History will remember them as bridge builders, connecting post-war repression to the explosion coming next. Summer music, incense, marches love. Cannabis, patient traveler, just slides pockets to pockets waiting. You close your eyes as the train roars on. In its rhythms, you almost hear the coming generation tuning guitars, painting protest signs, and rolling their own metaphors. The road to the 1960s hums right beneath your seat. Somewhere between the rattle of that beat train and the hum of a radio tuning itself, you feel the world tilt. The air tastes louder. Incense, guitar feedback, sandalwood and revolution. It's the mid-1960s, so's bare feet on grass, paint on denim, and a haze hanging permanent over San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury. You can hear it before you see it. Sitar notes bending through open windows, laughter dissolving into coughs. The slow heartbeat of a movement learning to breathe as one. You wander through a summer that calls itself of love. A season attempting to heal a century's scars with music and shared smoke. The crowd spills across Golden Gate Park like spilled watercolor. Banners sway, children dance with daisies tucked behind ears. And somewhere a stranger is playing, Rabbit, on a worn-out record player. Cannabis, finally freed from whispers, has become emblem. Protest plant, peace plant, the stand-in for every gentle defiance. Mainstream historical fact: in 1967 alone, U.S. cannabis arrests tripled even as counterculture exploded. The San Francisco scene merged civil rights idealism with psychedelia, blending East and West philosophies into one glowing joint of utopia. Historians still argue whether the movement's reliance on cannabis was political or incidental, symbolic rebellion against authority, or genuine spiritual pursuit. Probably both. You can tell because half the crowd quotes Gandhi, while the other half just wants to hug everyone. You drift into the fog of a park drum circle. Rhythm booms low and communal, echoing ancient Scythian beats reinvented as protest percussion. Strangers pass joints like communion wafers. A girl scrawls peace signs on strangers' backs with marker, saying, "Love is tax-free so far." Everyone laughs, even irony sounds soft tonight. Nearby, a banner flaps against the wing, "Make love, not war." Someone adds in smaller letters beneath it, "and pass the pipe." Political slogans and jokes blur together until they mean the same thing. For once, rebellion feels kind, though it still smells suspiciously like burned paper. The plant has transcended purpose again. Hemp-weaved ropes, tinctures healed, jazz-inspired, now weed unites. A fringe tidbit floats around this decading. Scientists at Hebrew University identify tetrahydrocannabinol, the psychoactive key inside cannabis. It's a eureka worthy of irony. Modern chemistry finally labeling what mystics and musicians already knew. Historians still argue whether this discovery marked enlightenment or the starting gun for government control. Within years, the same knowledge will feed the war on drugs playbook. You follow a crowd toward a free concert in the Panhandle. Guitars twang. The Grateful Dead hum through amplifiers that crackle under open sky. Smoke rises like incense at a global ceremony, everyone equal under its drifting canopy. A guy beside you whispers, "Somewhere the Dalai Lama just smiled." You decide it's plausible. The mood feels endless until the cops arrive. Sirens wail, blue lights cutting through tie-dye. Panic ripples, brief but sharp. A girl hides her stash inside a conga drum. A boy pretends to meditate while exhaling suspiciously. Authority doesn't understand yet that rebellion prefers rhythm to violence. When the officers leave, the crowd cheers like they've invented peace anew. In cafes, poets draft manifestos between bong hits. In communes, experimental farmers rediscover hemp's strength for weaving, declaring it the people's fiber. Some talk about legal reform, most just build hammocks. But the movement, loose as it seems, plants lasting seeds. Sustainability, equality, environmentalism. Cannabis becomes shorthand for questioning everything: war, patriarchy, pollution, police. You hitch a ride north to Seattle, then east to Woodstock. Mud swallows your shoes as 500,000 people sway under rain and guitar solos. Jimi Hendrix stretches the national anthem into lament and promise. Somewhere behind you, a bonfire crackles. Someone offers you a joint rolled too loosely but with sincere affection. You inhale. The smoke tastes like patience, like crowds believing music can change governments. Maybe it can, for a minute. A historian's voice might one day label this nave, but naivety built cathedrals once, and now it builds festivals. The plant watches again, unchanged yet evolving through context, from scythe fields to sit-ins. Always the same leaf teaching humans to slow down enough to notice they share oxygen. Not everyone dances, though. Across televisions, presidents frown, and bureaucrats load metaphors into legislation. Cannabis becomes scapegoat for counterculture itself, blamed for disobedience, dissent, and hair length. By the early 1970s, Nixon signs the Controlled Substances Act, slotting marijuana into Schedule I. No medical use. The irony stings. A government that once begged farmers for help now denies its existence as medicine. Historians still argue whether America feared the drug or the togetherness it symbolized. You watch congressmen rail against hippies while wearing hemp ties, oblivious to irony. The plant shrugs as plant keeps growing, night deepens again. Across the state line, a convoy of VW buses hums down highways. Windows painted with peace slogans. You ride along. People sway to the Beatles and talk about building a fairer world. Someone passes another joint. Maybe love isn't a revolution. A red-haired boy muses. Maybe it's maintenance. The smoke curls like affirmation. When dawn blooms, your bus crests a hill overlooking fog-drenched farmland that smells faintly familiar. Hemp sprouting feral again. The wind feels lighter here, as if carrying exhaled hope from the night before. Head waits another era, clenched, bureaucratic, cold. But that's for later. For now, the 60s fade in soft light, fragrant, imperfect, unforgettable, wrapped in the same smoke humans have been sharing for thousands of years. Morning drips into the 1970s like the end of a party you're reluctant to leave. The flowers wilt, the guitars crackle, but the smoke still clings to everything. Bedspreads, denim jackets, and laws that never quite cool down. You wake in a college dorm room where protest posters curl at the edges and somebody's record player hums between vinyl scratches. Gone is the shouted optimism of the 60s. In its place rises something quieter, tougher, and distinctly political. The news in the background drones about the war on drugs. President Nixon grins from the screen, declaring cannabis public enemy number one. You watch the moment roll out across black and white TV. Another crusade for morality presented like a sequel nobody asked for. The same plant that united crowds beneath rain now unites government agencies in budget memos. Mainstream historical facto in 1970, the U.S. A Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act, labeling marijuana a Schedule I narcotic, officially as dangerous and useless as heroin. By the decade's midpoint, the DA was born, enforcement tightening while research was strangled. Historians still argue whether these policies were about public health or politics. Many trace them directly to the desire to suppress anti-war and black civil rights movements linked culturally with cannabis. You step outside, campus grass glittering with dew, and see students passing joints with the care of conspirators. The air smells wary, like hope hiding beneath cynicism. Everyone's seen friends drafted, jailed, or just tired. Cannabis, stripped of utopian halo, becomes modus therapy. Something to survive reality, not transcend it. Down the dorm hall, a student with an afro the size of a revolution tunes his guitar. Power's in your lungs, he jokes. But truth lies under humor. The federal government uses drug laws to target progressive groups, from Black Panthers to anti-war organizers. Arrest rates climb, fairness plummets. It's hard to preach peace when the police knock hourly. A fringe tidbit from these years go. Nixon's own appointed Schiffer Commission in 1972 recommended partial decriminalization, stating cannabis presented less harm than alcohol. Nixon promptly ignored it. Historians still argue if he ever read the report. He preferred an enemy simple enough to package for voters. You drive cross-country in a second-hand van plastered with stickers. Don't panic, legalize it, save the whales. The highways hum, roadside diners hum lower. At every gas stop, someone tells you where to find good grass. The new slang replacing tea and muggles with suburban subtlety. Behind curtains, suburban parents sneak hits after work. The plant is no longer counterculture, it's coping mechanism. In California, beach fires spark music again. A Bob Marley record spins in someone's van, preaching liberation on rhythm borrowed from the Caribbean's own long battle with colonial bands. Reggae becomes the next symphony of smoke, fusing faith and rebellion. The Rastafarian movement calls cannabis ganja, a sacrament connecting humanity to Jah. When Marley sings, herb is the healing of the nation. It sounds less like metaphor than prophecy. You watch waves roll under sunset, smoke drifting to match the tide. The jokes are lighter here: surfers, students, dreamers. Yet arrests still climb, even as some states quietly reduce penalties. Oregon leads in 1973. The federal stance hardens. Activism takes root around NORML. The newly formed lobbying group arguing for legalization through reasoned debate instead of daisies and drum circles. You attend a meeting in a cramped DC office where optimism is rationed like coffee. We're not stoners, one lawyer insists. We're citizens. You nod, knowing both are often the same thing. In the broader background, America unravels. Vietnam ends, Watergate drips, scandal, trust erodes. People want simplicity, certainty, distractions. For some, cannabis remains rebellion. For others, it becomes background noise to television laughter tracks. The sharp magic of the 60s mellows into habit. Paranoia hums under it all. A friend whispers about government labs testing THC on volunteers. Another repeats rumors of CIA experiments mixing cannabis with truth serum. Half fact, half fear? It doesn't matter. Everyone's certain someone, somewhere, is studying how to control what they can't comprehend. Pop culture, too, transforms the plant into comedy. Cheech and Chong roll into theaters, turning illegality into laughter. Their films, half-improvised haze, make middle America giggle while quietly humanizing users mainstream discourse calls criminals. You're making people laugh at something they're supposed to fear. That's subtle revolution. Later, you find yourself at a backyard barbecue. The radio plays Fleetwood Mac. Neighbors barbecue obliviously while one guest lights a joint behind a shed. The conversation circles back to taxes, mortgages, and why nobody trusts any institution anymore. You realize the new rebellion is simply honesty, disguised as casualness. The 60s tried shouting love. The 70s settled for surviving truthfully. Historians still argue whether these years built or buried legalization. Decriminalization laws in a few states offered light, but federal hostility cast long shadows. What's undeniable is that cannabis refused extinction. Suburban kids carried it in glove compartments, veterans used it for unacknowledged trauma, artists folded it into lyrics no censor noticed. It lived quietly, methodically, like a seed waiting for better weather. You wander home under streetlights buzzing with moths. A police car crawls by, too slowly. You inhale the last inch of your joint, heart tapping faster, reflex born of years of propaganda. You crush the ember into dust. The moths keep circling, drawn not to danger, only to light. In that flickering hello, you realize the 70s perfectly match hemp's resiliency. Trampled often but never gone, changing shape to survive authorities' glare. The smoke trails upward, joining night clouds that look a lot like drifting history. Somewhere beyond those clouds, another decade waits to rediscover faith. Not spiritual, but medical. The next chapter, after all this paranoia, will belong to microscopes and patient advocacy. You flick your lighter once more. Not for smoke this time, but for metaphor. Tiny flame against an entire bureaucracy of darkness. History, stubborn as ever, inhales. Fluorescent lights replace lava lamps, and the world smells of antiseptic and optimism cautiously bottled. You've stepped into the late 20th century. Labs buzzing, legislation tightening, and whispers of rediscovery beginning anew. The 1980s arrive in a crisp suit, chewing regulation for breakfast. Still beneath its polished corporate heartbeat, cannabis persists like an underground current of memory. The cold dawn of Reagan's war on drugs sweeps across America. Billboards bloom with slogans. Just say no. Television turns into moral theater. Commercials showing frying pans and cracked eggs promising your brain will melt if you touch marijuana. You can almost smell the overcooked metaphor. Mainstream historical fact: in 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act instituted mandatory minimum sentences, effectively weaponizing prisons against low-level drug offenders. During Reagan and Bush administrations, arrests for marijuana more than doubled. Historians still argue whether those policies targeted substances or social groups. Communities of color bore the brunt, their jails filling as judgment turned into infrastructure. You stand in a courtroom where a teenager trembles as a judge reads off years for possession smaller than your thumbnail. The gavel's hollow knock sounds suspiciously like an echo from that 1930s theater reel. Fear loves a sequel, yet repression always breeds quiet defiance. In California's quiet corners, ADS activists care for friends government policy ignores. Hospitals overflow, faith runs thin. And one remaining comfort grows illegally on rooftops and windowsills: cannabis easing nausea and pain. In San Francisco, a man named Dennis Perrin opens a compassion club, defying authorities to supply patients. No one should die in fear or in jail, he says. That line lingers like incense. By the early 1990s, scientists at Hebrew University isolate naturally produced cannabinoids in the human body, an internal mirror of the plant's chemistry. Christened the endocannabinoid system. It's as if biology itself raises its hand in class, confessing, "Yes, I recognize that leaf. We've met before." Historians still argue whether this discovery marks a reclaiming of scientific integrity or simply belated admission of ancient truth. Meanwhile, public consciousness wavers between rebellion and relief. On television, Nancy Reagan frowns from every channel. In basements, teenagers pass joints behind VCR stacks, half scared, half amused. Parents pretend ignorance. Senators preach discipline. The generation gap smells faintly herbal. You wander through a record store, posters of Bob Marley beside Metallica cassettes. A customer wearing fluorescent sneakers mutters, "Everything illegal eventually becomes vintage." He isn't wrong. Even marketing begins winking. Novelty t-shirts print half jokes about herbal remedies. The 80s cannot fully extinguish irony. A fringe ticketing during Reagan's first term. Internal memos surfaced showing government researchers frustrated that cannabis stubbornly refused to produce the predicted death rates of harder drugs. Their experiments ended as budgets were routed to PR campaigns. Historians still argue whether science ever had a fair shot. The plant, disqualified from conversation, awaited out the nonsense quietly in sheltered closets and garage grow labs. Then, 1996, another poster year. California, bold as its coastline, passes Proposition 21-5, the Compassionate Use Act. For the first time since Prohibition, medical cannabis becomes legal at state level. Patients emerge into daylight holding prescriptions scrawled like emancipation papers. Nurses cry, politicians panic, the federal government frowns. But the dam is cracked, and Prohibition's voice no longer sounds absolute. You visit one of the first legal dispensaries, a modest storefront lined with glass jars and cautious smiles. The scent in the air is both clinical and comforting. Halfway between apothecary and utopia, people discuss cannabinoid ratios like wine notes. The mood isn't chaotic like the 60s, it's pragmatic, adult, and determined. "We fought for this," a patient says, showing chemo scars. It's medicine, not myth. Outside, protesters wave signs on both sides. "Healing herb," meets, "gateway drug," in a chorus of contradiction. Truth, as usual, stands somewhere between them, rolling its eyes. By the late 90s, more states follow. Canada debates national reform. European countries quietly decriminalize possession. The internet, new and awkward, spreads research faster than governments can redact it. You scroll early message boards filled with doctors swapping study data, activists sharing cultivation tips, teenagers swapping bad puns. Connectivity itself becomes the next intoxicant. In Washington, officials double down. DA raids compassion clubs, seizing medicine in sterile plastic bags. Television networks replay footage deliberately stripped of context. Yet each raid births 1,000 new advocates. Outrage too can be fertile. As the millennium approaches, cultural rhythm shifts once again. The plant loses its hippie halo and gains a doctor's clipboard. Scientists publish data on cannabinoids reducing seizures, calming PTSD, soothing chronic pain. A patient speak through tears on talk shows. Senators promise Further review. Historians still argue whether legalization momentum grew from compassion or capitalism, but those forces, for once, march together. You stand on a hill overlooking San Francisco again. The skyline glows with late-century ambition, dot-com dreams, and recycled revolution. Somewhere below, patients line up outside dispensaries that smell faintly of both rebellion and sanitizer. The wind tastes clean. You exhale slowly, thinking of all the centuries that led here, from ritual fires in Scythian circles to fluorescent grow rooms under California law. Humanity's relationship with this plant has never been linear. It's a spiral, tightening and opening with every generation's fears. A night settles blue over the bay. Down on the pier, a busker plays Redemption Song on a steel guitar. The melody rides the wind straight into your pulse. The refrain feels less like nostalgia, more like prediction. You realize that what began as survival, smoke to eat, smoke to heal, smoke to think, has turned into an ongoing negotiation between freedom and control. The century will end debating dosage. The next will start debating taxes. Progress rarely smells this earthy. Tomorrow, modernity arrives. Labs with glass walls, venture capital, THC percentages printed like cereal nutrition labels. But before automation and advertisements, there's this moment of piecing the plant, finally legal in some places, respected in a few, and still whispering to anyone willing to listen. You breathe in the fog, feel it mix with faint sweetness, and think history never ends, it just changes clothes. You open your eyes to a world trimmed in touchscreen light, the 21st century, glowing like perpetual sunrise. What began as whispered rebellion now displays itself on billboards. ECBD chocolate, THC seltzer, farm to flower wellness. Humanity has learned to brand its contradictions well. Cannabidiol lounges beside kale in grocery aisles, while dispensaries resemble Apple stores lit by neon serenity. The plant that once lived in shadows now hums under LED grow lights, cultivated by engineers who treat soil like code. You stroll down a modern main street, half cafe, half micro-farm. The air hums with low jazz and faint terpenes, digital menaceless strains next to poetic-tasting notes. A barista offers you a latte with microdose infusion. Across the street, another shop sells hempcrete bricks. Eco-friendly homes literally grown from history's oldest outlaw. You grin. Its official weed went respectable. Mainstream historical facts starting in the 2010s, broad legalization swept across North America. Colorado and Washington opened the first legal recreational markets in 2012, triggering a domino effect. By the 2020s, dozens of U.S. states, plus Canada, Uruguay, and parts of Europe, allowed regulated adult use. Historians still argue whether economics or enlightenment drove the change, but fiscal reports outnumber sermons. Legalization proved what ancient farmers already suspected: cannabis grows profit faster than fear. You pass a glass-walled greenhouse where robotic arms prune plants with a tenderness once reserved for bonsai. A technician in lab coat adjusts dials labeled humidity and euphoria index. Science and art now share a cubicle space. Inside the facility, cannabinoid researchers map genomes, crossbreeding THC's mischief with CBD's calm. One holds up a sample and jokes. This one's anxiety-free optimism. You laugh because that's like something humanity's wanted for about 10,000 years. Medicinal use has matured too. You meet veterans with vapor pens instead of painkillers, cancer patients describing appetite as returned miracle, parents of epileptic children crying gratitude over legal tinctures. Television ads once said, "Just say no." Now doctors say, "Just dose carefully." The shift didn't fix the world, but it softened parts of it. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your scrolling feed. NASA data suggests cannabinoids may even help plants themselves resist stress. Historians, still catching their breaths, argue whether the plant is evolving for humans or we for it. The answer feels mutual. But for all this technological calm, old ghosts hover. In some countries, a possession still ruins lives. In others, corporations patent strains built over centuries of indigenous knowledge. A prison still hold people for doing what billion-dollar companies now broadcast on billboards. Progress remains uneven. Half justice, half marketing campaign. Humanity never legalizes consistency. You sit outside a dispensary shaped like a spaceship, enjoying the paradox synthetic futurism powered by ancient roots. Customers walk past clutching products labeled with absurd precision. 10 meg here, 5 mug there. As if enlightenment could be dosed by decimal. Yet behind every bottle lies that same whisper from campfires and templates. Breathe, slow down, listen. A man in a suit joins your bench. He checks his watch, sighs, and offers you a mint. Sativa, he adds as if sharing a stock tip. You both laugh. Commerce has replaced counterculture, but the laughter sounds no less human. Elsewhere, the environmental movement revives hemp for sustainability, fuel, paper, textiles, biodegradable plastics. Fields of tall green ripple again across planet Earth, this time defended by data instead of dogma. Industrial hemp quietly becomes hero again. Ropes reborn as eco-threads. You can practically hear the Scythians chuckling from prehistory. We tried to tell you it multitasks. Historians still argue what legalization means philosophically. Is it amends for a century of misinformation or merely a new consumer boom? Maybe it's both. Capitalism inhaling enlightenment and selling it back wholesale. You suspect the plant doesn't care, it's endured worse branding. Twilight leaks purple over the city skyline. LED grow lights glow pink in rooftop gardens. Soft halos replacing the smoke of fires long gone. You take a slow draw from a vape pen designed by someone obsessed with minimalist beauty. It buzzes politely. No smell, no stigma, almost too tidy, yet the feeling, the gentle hush behind the eyes, is precisely what ancestors recognized burning raw leaves on riverbanks. Everything changes and nothing does. You imagine Shen Nung, Scythian riders, Egyptian priests, beat poets, and jasmine all sitting here, the passing their eras like a shared joint. The smoke of time rises unchanged, carrying stories of healing, fear, worship, laughter. If history ever needed a metaphor for persistence, it could just point to this plant. Now wanderers use QR codes instead of prayer bowls, but intention feels identical. Soften the edges of consciousness, reconnect with something kind. Maybe that's the plant's only constant purpose, to remind species obsessed with progress how to pause. The night wind shifts, smelling faintly of citrus and nostalgia. Neon signs hum. Somewhere a university thesis begins. Cannabis as cultural mirror. Somewhere else, a poet just writes, my grandparents went to jail so I could sleep better. Both are right. You finish your drink, the faint taste of earth on your tongue. The city hums like modern ritual, part laboratory, part temple. The world that once outlawed calm now markets it by the ounce. You smile, imagining future historians scrolling through digital archives, still arguing whether this moment was victory or irony. The truth, as always, drifts between columns of smoke. And as your eyes grow heavy, the centuries feel close again. Fireside to laboratory, rope to ritual, fear to legislation, laughter to law. Every inhale through time has led here one shared breath beneath an ancient sky that never bothered to take sides. The lights outside your window fade into quiet constellations. Traffic slows to a hum so gentle it could be ocean surf far away. You breathe evenly, letting every century you've wandered settle behind your eyelids. The Scythian tents, the Nile temples, the Bohemian cafes, all of them dissolve like smoke finally finding sky. The story feels circular now. Every generation rediscovering the same calm disguised as rebellion. Humans have argued, legislated, and sung about a single leaf longer than they've known electricity. Proof that comfort isn't invention, but inheritance. That realization unfolds like a granted wish. Slow, weightless, almost audible. You picture the plant still growing somewhere, swaying lightly in warm midnight air. No politics there, no markets. Just leaves gathering moonlight the way lungs gather breath. History keeps exhaling, future keeps inhaling. The rhythm feels endless, and you are small but serenely placed in its pattern. In the distance, a breeze stirs. Maybe it's time brushing past you. Maybe it's the echo of every storyteller who ever stared into dusk and found wonder in something ordinary. You let that thought drift closer, softer, slower, until it lands between heartbeats. Now the world around you grows gentler, the ceiling fan turning steady circles, your breath following its tempo, eyelids murmuring toward rest. Facts fade to feeling, sound melts to quiet. Somewhere above your dreams, the ancient smoke rises still, patient and fragrant, folding centuries into one long sigh of relief. Sleep well. End of story. Sweet dreams.